The galaxy in the 31st millennium groaned under the weight of unending war. From the eastern fringe to the gates of terror, the Emperor's great crusade swept across 1,000,000 worlds, bringing unity through conquest and compliance through fire. Yet even in that age of manifest destiny, there were powers older than mankind, Xenos empires that gazed upon the rising tide of humanity with ancient eyes and calculated malice. On the world of Nurth, beneath skies choked with the smoke of a dying rebellion, the 20th Legion brought another campaign to its inevitable conclusion. The Alpha Legion had earned their reputation through methods that other Legion's Astartes found distasteful but undeniably effective. Where the Imperial fists would shatter walls with overwhelming force, where the Ultramarines would advance with measured precision, the Alpha Legion struck from shadows, turned brother against brother, and won through deception what others claimed through valor alone. Alpharius Omegon stood upon the ramparts of what had once been the planetary capital's greatest fortress. His armor bore the serpentine iconography of his legion, hydra scales gleaming dull green in the dying light. Around him, the sounds of a world submission echoed across the ruins. The native population had fought with the desperation of the doomed, but desperation alone could not stand against the Emperor's will, made manifest. The compliance had taken 6 months. Other legions might have accomplished it in 3, but would have left behind a smoldering wasteland. The Alpha Legion's approach was more nuanced. Where they could not break the enemy's will to fight, they had turned that will against itself. Tribal alliances had fractured along carefully exploited fault lines. Supply convoys had vanished without trace, their contents redistributed to create famine in loyalist strongholds, and plenty among those who embraced imperial rule. By the time the Legion's main forces revealed themselves, half the population believed they were liberators rather than conquerors. My lord. The voice belonged to one of his captains, though beneath the Alpha Legion's methods of concealment, even Alpharius could not be certain which one. The Legion's practices of identity swapping and false faces made such certainties fluid. The final resistance pocket has fallen. The world is ours. Alpharius nodded, his attention already turning to the reports streaming in from across the sector. 3 more worlds awaited compliance. The Great Crusade's momentum couldn't be allowed to falter, not when each day of delay cost the Imperium precious resources and lives. Yet something stirred uneasily in his thoughts, a sensation he had learned not to dismiss during his decades of warfare. The twin bond he shared with Omegon carried whispers of concern from across the void, where his brother commanded another facet of their legion's far-flung operations. The warning came not through astropathic transmission or Vox channel, but through older senses. A figure approached through the ruins, moving with the casual confidence of one who belonged precisely where he stood. Human in appearance, but there was something in his gait that suggested depths beneath the surface, currents that ran darker than mere flesh could contain. Lord Primarch. The stranger's voice carried the refined accent of Terra's upper spires, but his eyes held the weight of centuries. I bring greetings from those who have watched your legion's work with great interest. Alpharius didn't move, but around him the shadows seemed to shift as his warriors took positions. The Alpha Legion never left their Primarch unguarded, though their methods of protection remained as subtle as everything else they did. You speak as though we have met before, Alpharius replied, his voice carrying the measured tone that could mean either curiosity or threat. Yet I would remember such a conversation. The stranger smiled, and in that expression lay something that made the Primarch's enhanced senses prickle with warning. My name is John Grammaticus. I serve interested parties, those who have observed the Imperium's expansion with a perspective that spans millennia rather than mere decades. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Alpharius had encountered Xenos emissaries before, alien dignitaries seeking terms or offering allegiance to avoid the Imperium's wrath. This felt different. The man before him radiated an authority that spoke of powers beyond the merely political. "The Cabal extends an invitation," Grammaticus continued, his tone never wavering, despite the dozens of bolt weapons now trained upon him from concealed positions. "A gift of sight that few mortals are permitted to receive. Knowledge of futures yet unwritten, choices yet unmade." Alpharius felt the psychic resonance that bound him to his distant twin sharpen, Omegon's concern bleeding across the void to join his own growing unease. Whatever this man represented, it was significant enough to warrant both their attention. "Speak your offer plainly," Alpharius commanded, his voice carrying the authority of one born to rule worlds. "The 20th Legion has no patience for riddles." Grammaticus reached within his robes, producing a crystalline device that pulsed with inner light. "The gift of prophecy, Lord Primarch. The chance to witness what will come to pass should current patterns persist. The Cabal offers this vision freely, seeking only that you understand the full scope of what approaches." The crystal blazed suddenly bright, and reality twisted around them both. Alpharius found himself standing not upon Nirth's blood-soaked soil, but in a space between spaces, where time flowed like water and possibility took solid form. Beside him stood Omegon, their twin bond, allowing them both to witness what the Cabal's vision revealed. They saw the galaxy burning. They witnessed a civil war that would tear the Imperium apart, brother turning against brother, Primarch raising sword against Primarch. They saw their father, the Emperor, enthroned upon Terra but diminished, his great work undone by treachery from within. The vision showed them Horus, brightest of their brotherhood, corrupted by powers that whispered promises of godhood while demanding damnation as payment. The first future blazed before them in all its terrible clarity. Should the Emperor emerge victorious from the coming war, the Imperium would endure for 10,000 years, but those years would be marked by stagnation and decay. Humanity would survive, but it would never again reach for the stars with the same boundless ambition. The species would become a shadow of its former glory, sustained only by faith and fear, while the galaxy around it descended into eternal war. But there was another path. The vision shifted, showing them a darker possibility. If Horus succeeded, if the Emperor fell and the Imperium burned, humanity would perish within mere generations. Yet in that apocalyptic ending, the Chaos Gods themselves would be destroyed, their power broken by the very destruction they had wrought. The galaxy would be cleansed of their corruption, though the cost would be the extinction of the human race. "You must choose," Grammaticus whispered, his voice echoing through the vision space. "Support the Emperor and condemn humanity to millennia of suffering. Support Horus and grant the galaxy peace through the ultimate sacrifice." The vision faded, leaving them once again upon Nirth's scarred surface. Alpharius felt the weight of what they had witnessed, the terrible knowledge of futures yet to unfold. Beside him, though separated by light years, he felt Omegon's presence through their psychic bond, his twin equally shaken by the revelation. For long moments, silence reigned. The sounds of the dying world seemed distant, irrelevant compared to the cosmic choice that had been laid before them. Around them, the Alpha Legion's warriors waited, their loyalty absolute, but their understanding limited to what they could perceive through mortal senses. When Alpharius spoke, his voice carried a certainty that surprised even himself. No. Grammaticus blinked, the first crack in his composed demeanour. Lord Primarch, I said no. Alpharius stepped forward, and in that moment he seemed less like a man and more like the avatar of absolute conviction. You offer us a choice between two forms of damnation, alien. You would have us betray our father in service to some greater good that serves only your master's agenda. The Primarch's voice rose, carrying across the ruins with the force of divine judgment. We are the Emperor's sons, first, last, and always. His blood flows in our veins. His vision guides our purpose. No alien prophecy will turn us from that path. Grammaticus took a step backward, his confidence finally wavering. You do not understand the scope of what approaches. The powers that move against your father are beyond anything the Imperium has faced. Then we will face them as loyalists, Alpharius declared, his words carrying the weight of oath-binding. The 20th Legion serves the throne, not alien manipulators who cloak their agenda in false prophecy. For the first time since the conversation began, Grammaticus appeared genuinely surprised. Around them, the shadows stirred as the Alpha Legion's hidden watchers absorbed their Primarch's declaration, adding their own silent assent to his words. The Cabal will remember this choice, Grammaticus said finally, his tone carrying the chill of winter. When the fires of civil war consume the galaxy, when brother turns against brother and the Emperor's dream becomes nightmare, know that you were offered another path. And know that we chose honor over expedience, Alpharius replied. Warn your masters, alien. Tell them that when their pawns move against the throne, they will find the Alpha Legion standing ready to defend it. Our loyalty may be questioned by others, but it will never be betrayed. Grammaticus began to fade, his form becoming translucent as whatever power had brought him here withdrew its influence. The game has larger stakes than you realize, Alpharius. Larger players. You may yet come to regret this choice. Regret is a luxury of those who survive to see the consequences of their actions, the Primarch answered. We will face whatever comes with clear conscience. The alien agent vanished, leaving only the sound of wind across ruins and the distant reports of his warriors completing their assigned tasks. But Alpharius remained motionless, his enhanced mind already racing through implications and possibilities. He had rejected the Cabal's manipulation, but their warning carried truth beneath its alien agenda. A civil war was coming, treachery that would strike at the heart of the Great Crusade. The vision had shown him which of his brothers would fall to corruption, which would remain loyal when the moment of choice arrived. That knowledge was a weapon, perhaps the greatest weapon the Imperium possessed. Used correctly, it could prevent the very catastrophe the Cabal had shown him. The Alpha Legion's methods were already perfectly suited to such a task. Networks of operatives, layers of deception, plans within plans that could unfold across decades if necessary. Transmission to the fleet, he commanded, his voice carrying across the private Vox channel that connected him to his most trusted captains. Begin immediate recall of all deployed assets. New priority operations are to commence within the solar month. As the acknowledgements flowed back, Alpharius began composing the carefully coded message that would summon Omegon from his own distant campaign. The galaxy might burn, but it would not fall to the machinations of alien puppet masters. The 20th Legion had always been the Emperor's hidden hand, working in shadows to accomplish what others could not achieve through open warfare. Now, they would become something more. They would become the guardians of secrets that could save the Imperium from itself, the watchers in the darkness who would ensure that when treachery finally revealed its face, the loyal sons would be ready to meet it. The war for humanity's future had begun. though most would not recognize it for years yet to come. But the Alpha Legion would be ready. They were always ready. The Hydra's many heads had turned toward a single purpose, the preservation of the Emperor's dream, whatever the cost might be. The void between stars held secrets that no astropath could fathom, communion channels that existed beyond the reach of the warp's chaotic currents. In the days that followed Nurth's compliance, Alpharius reached across the galaxy through bonds forged not by psychic training, but by the fundamental nature of their shared soul. The twin link that connected him to Omegon had always been their greatest asset, allowing coordination across impossible distances without risk of interception. His brother's presence flowed into his consciousness like water finding its proper level, bringing with it the familiar sensation of completeness that only their reunion could provide. Omegon was 3 sectors distant, overseeing compliance operations in the Ghoul stars, but the space between them collapsed into irrelevance as their minds touched. "Brother," came the wordless greeting, carrying undertones of concern that had been building since the encounter with Grammaticus. "I felt your distress across the void. What transpired on Nurth?" Alpharius shared the memory directly, allowing Omegon to experience the alien agent's approach, the crystal's blazing revelation, and most importantly, the twin visions of future catastrophe. He felt his brother's shock ripple through their connection, followed by the cold calculation that had always been their shared strength. "The alien spoke truth," Omegon replied after long moments of consideration. "The patterns are there, if one knows how to perceive them. Horus grows distant from Terra. Magnus delves deeper into sorcerous practices the Emperor has forbidden. The word-bearers preach of gods rather than imperial truth." Through their bond, Alpharius sensed his twin's growing understanding of the scope of what approached. The Great Crusade had always carried within it the seeds of its own destruction, but the Cabal's revelation had shown them exactly how those seeds would bloom into galactic civil war. "We must act," Alpharius declared, his mental voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Not as the aliens would have us, betraying our father for some perceived greater good, but as his hidden hand, preparing for a war that most will never see coming." Across the void, Omegon's agreement resonated with fierce determination. "What would you have us do?" The plan that unfolded between them carried the complexity that had always marked the Alpha Legion's operations, but magnified to encompass threats that spanned the galaxy itself. They would need to move carefully, gathering intelligence and positioning assets without arousing suspicion from their brother Primarchs or the Emperor's other servants. The 20th Legion's reputation for secrecy would serve them well, but even their established methods would need to evolve to meet this unprecedented challenge. Operation Cerberus, Alpharius decided, the name carrying weight beyond its simple meaning. The 3-headed hound of ancient Terra's mythology, guardian against threats from the realm of the dead. We will establish a network that can watch, warn, and if necessary, act against the corruption to come. The weeks that followed saw the Alpha Legion's disposition shift with subtle precision across dozens of war zones. To outside observers, it appeared to be nothing more than the usual flux of military operations, battle brothers rotating between assignments, specialist companies deploying to support other legions' campaigns. None suspected that each movement served a larger purpose, placing Alpha Legion assets within striking distance of potential threats. In the fleets of the Lunar Wolves, Alpha Legion operatives took positions as technical specialists and liaison officers, their presence justified by inter-legion cooperation protocols that Horus himself had encouraged. The War Master's approachable demeanor and genuine concern for unity between the legions made such exchanges seem natural rather than suspicious. Similar infiltrations began within the ranks of the word-bearers, though here the Alpha Legion's agents faced greater challenges. Lorgar's sons had always been insular, devoted to their Primarch's spiritual teachings in ways that made outsiders unwelcome. Yet even the most zealous brotherhood needed logistic support, technical expertise, and coordination with other Imperial forces. The Alpha Legion's reputation for administrative efficiency opened doors that direct approach would have sealed shut. The Death Guard proved more complex still. Mortarian's disdain for anything he perceived as weakness or dependency made his legion suspicious of outside assistance. But the Pale King's hatred of psychers provided an unexpected opening. Alpha Legion specialists, presenting themselves as experts in anti-psychic warfare and demon detection, found ready welcome among the Death Guard's upper ranks. Each placement required careful orchestration, months of preparation to establish appropriate credentials and justifications. The Alpha Legion's culture of identity swapping served them well here, allowing their operatives to assume cover identities that would withstand even gene scanner verification. When an Alpha Legion Marine claimed to be a specialist from another company, another world, another campaign entirely, the Legion's records would support that claim completely. Alpharius monitored each insertion personally, his enhanced mind tracking the complex web of deception spreading across the galaxy. Through his twin bond with Omegon, he coordinated similar operations in the Eastern Fringe, where other potentially compromised legions prosecuted their own campaigns far from Terra's oversight. The intelligence that flowed back confirmed their worst fears while revealing new threats they had not anticipated. Erebus, first chaplain of the Word-Bearers, had begun holding secret gatherings that bore disturbing similarities to the Cabal's descriptions of chaos corruption. The Death Guard's apothecaries reported increasing incidents of plague and decay on worlds they conquered, always attributed to local conditions rather than supernatural influence. Most troubling of all, reports from the Lunar Wolves suggested that the War Master himself had begun displaying signs of the pride and ambition that the alien vision had shown leading to his fall. Yet the greatest challenge lay not in gathering intelligence, but in determining how to act upon it without revealing their sources. The Alpha Legion could not simply present evidence of future treachery to the Emperor or his inner circle. Such claims would require explanations they dared not give, revealing their contact with the Cabal and potentially compromising everything they sought to protect. The solution came through channels so subtle that even Alpharius admired their elegance. Rather than direct reports, the Alpha Legion began seeding concerns through seemingly unrelated sources. A remembrancer's casual observation about changing practices within the Word-Bearers. An Imperial Army officer's routine complaint about plague outbreaks following Death Guard operations. A Mechanicum Tech Adept's technical report noting unusual equipment requisitions from the Lunar Wolves. Each fragment appeared insignificant alone, but together they formed a pattern that observant minds might recognize. The Alpha Legion ensured those fragments reached the appropriate destinations through a network of intermediaries so complex that even they could not be certain of all the connections. The first indication of success came through Malcador the Sigillite himself. The Emperor's right hand had always maintained his own intelligence networks, sources and agents that operated independent of the Legions Astartes or other imperial institutions. When those networks began reporting concerns that mirrored the Alpha Legion's carefully planted seeds, Alpharius knew their strategy was succeeding. The Sigillites' response exceeded even their careful projections. Rather than dismissing the reports as unsubstantiated rumors, Malcador quietly began his own investigations. The Alpha Legion's operatives, already positioned within the suspect legions, found themselves inadvertently recruited As sources for imperial intelligence operations they had indirectly inspired. The irony was not lost on either twin. By serving their father's interests through deception, they had become unwitting agents of his most trusted advisor's counterintelligence efforts. Their loyalty, expressed through methods that would appear treacherous to outside observers, had made them more valuable to the throne than any open declaration could have achieved. Yet success brought its own dangers. As Malcador's investigations deepened, the risk of discovery grew correspondingly. The Sigillites' agents were skilled, and their methods differed only in scope from the Alpha Legion's own practices. Sooner or later, the two networks would inevitably collide. When that collision came, it arrived through the most unexpected channel possible. A routine intelligence briefing in the depths of the Imperial Palace, where Malcador reviewed reports from across the galaxy with the small circle of agents who served his most sensitive operations. "The patterns are clear," the Sigillite declared, his ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries spent in service to the throne. "Someone is feeding us intelligence about potential corruption within the Legiones Astartes. The quality suggests sources with access to the highest levels of command." His pale eyes, sharp despite his apparent age, fixed upon a nondescript figure who stood at the briefing's edge. To most observers, the man appeared to be just another faceless agent in Malcador's service. Only the Sigillite himself recognized the subtle signs that marked him as something far more significant. "You may report to your Primarch that his efforts have not gone unnoticed," Malcador said quietly. "Tell Alpharius that the Emperor values loyalty in all its forms, even when that loyalty requires deception to serve its purpose." The Alpha Legion operative maintained his facade for precisely 3 heartbeats longer than necessary, a microtell that confirmed the Sigillite's suspicions while demonstrating that the discovery was not entirely unwelcome. When he spoke, his voice carried undertones that hinted at depths beneath the surface. "The Hydra serves the throne, Lord Sigillite. We always have." Malcador smiled, the expression carrying decades of accumulated wisdom about the true nature of service to powers greater than oneself. Indeed. And perhaps it is time that service took a more direct form. The conversation that followed would reshape the Alpha Legion's role in the coming crisis, transforming them from hidden guardians into active participants in the defense of the Imperium. Yet even as new possibilities opened before them, both Alpharius and Omegon understood that their greatest trials lay ahead. The Cabal had spoken truth about the war to come, but they had been wrong about the choices available. Loyalty did not require betrayal. Service to the Emperor could encompass methods that others might not understand or approve. The Alpha Legion would face the approaching darkness, not as aliens had commanded, but as sons of the Emperor determined to preserve his dream through whatever means necessary. The Hydra had begun to show its true nature, and the galaxy would never be the same. The first sign of corruption came not through grand proclamations or obvious heresy, but through whispered words in shadowed chambers where brothers gathered beyond the sight of their officers. The warrior lodges had spread through the Legiones Astartes like a plague, masquerading as fellowship, their true nature hidden beneath oaths of brotherhood and shared purpose that seemed innocent enough to those who had not witnessed the Cabal's terrible visions. Brother Sergeant Cathara of the Alpha Legion maintained his cover as a tactical specialist assigned to the Lunar Wolves' 3rd Company, with the same meticulous attention to detail that had marked his service for 3 decades. To his battle brothers, he was everything an Astartes should be: competent, reliable, devoted to the Emperor's vision of unity. None suspected that his true loyalty lay with the 20th Legion, or that his every observation flowed back through carefully encrypted channels to his actual commanders. The invitation came on a night when Horus's fleet had achieved compliance over yet another world, when victory celebrations echoed through the ship's corridors and wine flowed freely among the mortal crew. Kithara had expected another evening of routine surveillance, cataloguing the names and faces of those who served the War Master with particular distinction. Instead, he found himself approached by Brother Captain Luke Sedirai, one of Horus's most trusted officers. "You fight well, Kithara," Sedirai said, his tone carrying the weight of careful evaluation. "Better than most who claim expertise in tactical doctrine. There are others who have noticed your qualities." The words carried implications that made Kithara's enhanced senses sharpen with alertness. In his years of service with the Lunar Wolves, he had observed the gradual changes that marked the Legion's character. Where once they had been straightforward warriors devoted to conquest in the Emperor's name, subtle currents of ambition and pride had begun to color their brotherhood. The War Master's own growing distance from Terra had trickled down through the ranks, manifesting as quiet criticism of imperial policies and growing belief in their own superiority. "I serve the Legion," Kithara replied carefully, using the neutral formula that had served him well in dozens of similar conversations. "Whatever that service requires." Sedirai smiled, the expression carrying secrets that Kithara had learned to recognize as dangerous. "Then perhaps you would be interested in joining others who share that dedication. We meet tonight, after the watch rotation changes. Deck 17, Section Gamma. No weapons, no rank insignia, just brothers speaking truth to one another." The Warrior Lodge gathering that followed confirmed every fear that the Cabal's vision had instilled. 23 Marines gathered in a chamber, stripped of imperial iconography, its walls bearing symbols that hurt to perceive directly. At their center stood a figure whose presence radiated wrongness like heat from a forge, though his face remained perfectly human. Erebus, first chaplain of the Word-Bearers, spoke to the assembled Lunar Wolves with the practiced cadence of one who had delivered similar speeches across a dozen different legions. His words carried truth wrapped in poison, observations about the Emperor's failings and the Imperium's shortcomings that resonated with grievances the Marines had harbored but never dared express. "Your War Master sees what others cannot," Erebus declared, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass conscious thought entirely. "He understands that the Great Crusade's true purpose has been corrupted by those who would chain humanity to false ideals. The gods offer a different path, one where strength is rewarded and weakness cast aside." Kithara maintained his facade of interested attention, while his enhanced memory recorded every word, every gesture, every face in the assembled crowd. The corruption was deeper than even the Alpha Legion's worst projections had suggested. The warrior lodges were not merely gatherings of discontented Marines, but active cells of subversion, guided by powers that existed beyond the material realm. The evidence flowing back to Alpharius painted a pattern of corruption that spanned multiple legions and countless worlds. In the Death Guard's fleets, similar gatherings spoke of embracing decay as a form of strength, of finding brotherhood in shared suffering. The World Eater's lodges preached that honor lay in unleashing fury without restraint, that the Emperor's attempts to control their aggression weakened them rather than strengthened their purpose. Each report confirmed the vision's accuracy, while revealing new depths to the conspiracy. The powers that moved against the Emperor were not working through crude infiltration or obvious corruption, but through the subtle erosion of loyalty from within. They turned the Legion's greatest strengths against themselves, transforming brotherhood into conspiracy and duty into rebellion. The intelligence was too significant to trust to normal channels. When Alpharius finally moved to share what his operatives had discovered, he chose his contact with the same care he had applied to every other aspect of Operation Cerberus. Rogel Dawn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, had earned a reputation for unwavering loyalty that made him the natural choice for such a revelation. The meeting took place in the shadow of a dying star system, where the Alpha Legion fleet had supposedly encountered the Imperial Fists during routine patrol operations. To external observers, it appeared to be nothing more than a brief coordination conference between Allied forces, the kind of interaction that occurred daily throughout the Great Crusade's vast theatre of operations. Dawn's reaction to the requested private audience was exactly what Alpharius had anticipated. The Lord of the Seventh Legion approached the meeting with the same methodical caution that marked all his actions, his golden armor gleaming with the reflected light of distant suns, while his expression remained carefully neutral. "You speak of conspiracy within the Legion's Astartes," Dawn said once they were alone, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Such accusations require proof beyond mere suspicion." Alpharius had prepared for this moment with characteristic thoroughness. The artifacts his operatives had recovered from warrior lodge gatherings lay spread across the chamber's central table, each one radiating wrongness that even non-psychic Astartes could perceive. Symbols carved from materials that seemed to shift when observed directly, texts written in languages that hurt to read, weapons that whispered promises of power to those who would wield them. "The evidence speaks for itself," Alpharius replied, noting how Dawn's jaw tightened as he examined each artifact in turn. "The corruption spreads through multiple legions, guided by powers that have no loyalty to the throne or the imperial truth." For long moments, silence filled the chamber as Dawn processed the implications of what lay before him. The Lord of the Imperial Fists had built his reputation on careful analysis and methodical planning, but even his legendary patience showed strain under the weight of such revelations. "How long have you known?" Dawn finally asked, his tone carrying accusations that remained unspoken. "How long has the 20th Legion possessed this intelligence without sharing it?" The question struck at the heart of the Alpha Legion's dilemma. They could not reveal their contact with the Cabal without raising questions they dared not answer, could not explain their methods without compromising operations that remained vital to the Imperium's defense. Yet the truth, however partially revealed, served the Emperor's interests more faithfully than comfortable lies. "Long enough to gather proof that you would accept," Alpharius replied. "The Alpha Legion has always served the throne through methods others might not understand. This intelligence was acquired through means that must remain classified, but its accuracy has been verified through multiple independent sources." Dawn's expression hardened, but his attention returned to the artifacts rather than focusing on his brother's evasions. The evidence was too compelling to dismiss, too dangerous to ignore, regardless of how it had been obtained. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of decision rather than accusation. "The Emperor must be informed immediately. These things represent a threat to the very foundation of the Great Crusade." The meeting that followed in the depths of the Imperial Palace exceeded even Alpharius's carefully calculated projections. The Emperor's response to Dawn's report was swift and decisive, his golden presence radiating an authority that made even Primarchs feel small in comparison. Malcador stood at his side, the sigillite's ancient features grave as he examined the evidence that had traveled from distant battlefields to the heart of the Imperium. "The corruption runs deeper than we suspected," the Emperor declared, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond the merely physical. "If these influences have gained such purchase within the Legion's Astartes, then our enemies move with greater subtlety than we credited them." The response was immediate and far-reaching. New protocols were implemented for Legion communications, requiring additional verification for orders that originated outside normal command channels. Surveillance operations were quietly expanded, focusing particular attention on the legions that Alpha Legion intelligence had identified as compromised. Most significantly, the War Master himself came under increased scrutiny, his movements and communications monitored by agents whose existence he could only suspect. Horus's reaction to the increased oversight was as predictable as it was troubling. The War Master, accustomed to operating with near-complete autonomy, chafed under restrictions that seemed to question his loyalty and competence. His communications with Terra grew shorter and more formal, while his private conversations with trusted subordinates took on an edge of paranoia that his closest allies found deeply concerning. "They doubt us," Horus confided to his inner circle during a gathering that Alpha Legion surveillance dutifully recorded. "After everything we have accomplished, everything we have sacrificed in the Emperor's name, they question our dedication to the cause." The War Master's growing resentment served as validation for the intelligence that had prompted the increased oversight, but it also accelerated the very corruption it was meant to prevent. Doubt bred further doubt, paranoia fed upon itself, and the warrior lodges found fertile ground in the discontent that Imperial security measures had inadvertently fostered. Erebus, ever present at the edges of such gatherings, provided just enough encouragement to nurture the seeds of rebellion without revealing his hand. His whispered words spoke of the Emperor's ingratitude, of a father who no longer trusted his most accomplished son, of powers that offered recognition for true worth rather than demanding blind obedience. The Alpha Legion's operatives watched this transformation with growing alarm, their reports painting a picture of corruption that accelerated rather than slowed despite Imperial countermeasures. The Cabal's vision was becoming reality with each passing day, the loyal son's growing alienation paving the path toward ultimate betrayal. Yet even as the situation deteriorated, Alpharius found cause for cautious optimism. The Emperor knew of the threat now. His attention focused on enemies that had previously moved in complete shadow. The loyal Primarchs were alerted to the danger, their own security measures strengthened against corruption that might otherwise have claimed them unawares. Most importantly, the Alpha Legion's network had proven its worth beyond any doubt. The intelligence flowing through Operation Cerberus provided early warning of threats that conventional surveillance would have missed entirely. When the moment of ultimate crisis arrived, the Imperium would be as prepared as hidden knowledge and careful planning could make it. The Hydra had begun to show its fangs, and the galaxy trembled with the first tremors of the war to come. The betrayal at Istvan III began with a single order, transmitted across the void, innocent words that carried the weight of galactic civil war. Commence virus bombing, purge the surface of all life. The command bore the War Master's personal seal, authentication codes that no loyal servant of the Imperium would dare question. Yet hidden among the fleet elements that prepared to rain death upon their own brothers, Alpha Legion operatives watched with growing horror as the Cabal's vision became terrible reality. Brother Apothecary Vex of the Alpha Legion maintained his cover as a specialist attached to the Death Guard's medical corps, his presence justified by ongoing interlegion cooperation protocols that had seemed routine mere months before. Now, as he monitored the preparations for what Mortarian's sons believed to be a final assault against stubborn rebels, Vex understood that he was witnessing the opening moves of the war that would tear the galaxy apart. The intelligence flowing through Operation Cerberus had warned of this moment, but the scope of the betrayal exceeded even their careful projections. 4 entire legions had turned against the Emperor, their Primarchs corrupted by powers that promised dominion in exchange for damnation. The virus bombs falling toward Istvan, the third surface, carried death not just for the rebels who had defied Imperial compliance, but for every loyalist Marine unfortunate enough to be planet-side when the War Master revealed his true colours. Captain Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard 7th Company stood among those marked for death, though he did not yet understand his peril. The veteran officer had served the Emperor faithfully for decades, his loyalty to the throne absolute, despite growing concerns about his legion's direction. Like thousands of other loyal Astartes scattered across Istvan III's surface, he believed himself to be participating in a righteous campaign against those who would defy imperial authority. The virus payload struck with precision that spoke of careful planning and thorough preparation. Across continents, the Life-Eater strain spread through atmosphere and soil alike, transforming every living thing it touched into component atoms that would fuel an even greater conflagration. Cities burned with fires that no water could quench, while the screams of the dying echoed across planetary vox networks until silence claimed even those final desperate transmissions. Yet not every loyalist perished in that first terrible hour. The Alpha Legion's preparations had included contingencies for exactly this scenario, networks of safe houses and hidden bunkers that could shelter loyal Astartes from the viral holocaust. When the death clouds rolled across battlefields where brothers had fought side by side mere hours before, those who knew where to look found sanctuary in places that should not have existed. Vex guided a squad of Death Guard survivors through maintenance tunnels that had been secretly modified during the campaign's early stages, their route leading toward a bunker complex that bore no resemblance to standard Imperial construction. The Marines who followed him were confused and desperate, their world transformed into nightmare without warning or explanation. "How did you know?" Brother Sergeant Chrysos demanded, his voice carrying accusation alongside gratitude. "How did you know where to find shelter from that?" The question struck at the heart of the Alpha Legion's dilemma. They could not reveal the source of their intelligence without exposing operations that remained vital to the Imperium's survival, yet neither could they allow loyal warriors to die through ignorance when knowledge might save them. Intelligence suggested the possibility of chemical weapons deployment, Vex replied, using the partial truth that had served the Alpha Legion well in dozens of similar situations. Contingencies were prepared against multiple threat scenarios. The explanation satisfied desperate Marines who had witnessed their entire world transform into a charnel house, but Vex knew it would not survive detailed scrutiny from those with authority to demand complete answers. When the survivors reached Terra, if they reached Terra, harder questions would follow. The Eisenstein had been positioned at the edge of the system's gravity well when the virus bombing commenced, her assignment to monitor for fleeing rebel vessels, providing perfect cover for what Captain Garrow could not yet know would be his salvation. The frigate's auger arrays recorded the death of a world in perfect detail, while her crew watched in stunned horror as their own legion participated in genocide on a scale that defied comprehension. Garrow's first instinct was to return planet-side, to stand with his brothers regardless of the fate that awaited them. Only the intervention of those he trusted most prevented him from condemning himself and his crew to the same doom that had claimed so many others. Battle Captain Voyan of the Alpha Legion, serving as a liaison officer aboard the Eisenstein, provided the intelligence that transformed noble suicide into strategic withdrawal. The virus bombing was coordinated across multiple Legion elements, Voyan reported, his voice carrying grim certainty, despite the impossibility of what he described. This was not a tactical decision made in response to battlefield conditions. This was planned. Our own Primarchs have turned against the Emperor. The words struck Garrow like physical blows, each syllable destroying assumptions that had shaped his entire existence. Yet the evidence was undeniable, recorded by the Eisenstein's own instruments, and confirmed by Vox traffic that painted a picture of betrayal beyond imagination. "We carry word to Terra," Garrow declared, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he contemplated. "The Emperor must know what has transpired here." What Garrow could not know was that the intelligence he carried had been carefully augmented by sources he could not suspect. The Alpha Legion surveillance network had compiled comprehensive data on the traitor Legion's dispositions, their fleet strengths, their plans for future operations. When the Eisenstein departed Istvan III, her databanks contained not just warning of betrayal, but detailed strategic intelligence that would prove invaluable in the war to come. The journey to Terra tested every system aboard the frigate, her Geller fields straining against warp currents that seemed actively hostile to their mission. Strange phenomena plagued the ship's passage, whispers in languages that hurt to hear, visions of futures that might have been if different choices had been made. The powers that had corrupted the War Master clearly understood the threat that Garrow's warning represented, and they moved to prevent it from reaching its destination. Yet the Eisenstein carried more than mortal determination. Hidden among her crew, Alpha Legion operatives provided assistance that appeared coincidental, but proved crucial when crisis threatened the ship's survival. Navigation errors that might have cast them into the void were corrected by technical specialists whose expertise seemed unusually comprehensive. Engine malfunctions that could have stranded them between stars were resolved by ratings whose knowledge extended far beyond their supposed training. The frigate's arrival at Terra sent shockwaves through the Imperial Palace that echoed in dimensions beyond the merely physical. Garrow's testimony before the Emperor himself carried weight that no mere words could convey, his loyalty absolute despite the horror he had witnessed. Yet even more significant was the intelligence he delivered, data crystals containing information that transformed strategic understanding of the threat the Imperium faced. Rogel Dawn received the intelligence briefings with characteristic methodical analysis, his enhanced mind processing fleet dispositions and battle plans with the same careful attention he applied to fortress construction. The scope of what the traitor legions had accomplished in secret horrified him, but also provided opportunities that previous ignorance had precluded. "They move in coordination," Dawn observed, his voice carrying the weight of strategic revelation. "This is not mere rebellion, but war planned across years, if not decades. Yet now we know their dispositions, their intended targets, the scope of their ambitions." The Emperor's response exceeded even Alpha Legion projections in its swiftness and scope. Terra's defenses, already formidable, were reinforced beyond anything previously contemplated. Fleet elements that had been scattered across the galaxy received urgent recall orders, while loyal Primarchs found themselves summoned for emergency strategic conferences that would reshape the Imperium's entire defensive posture. Most significantly, the intelligence allowed for targeted countermeasures against traitor operations that might otherwise have succeeded through surprise alone. Fleet movements that the rebels believed were secret found loyal forces waiting in ambush. Supply convoys that should have reached traitor staging areas instead delivered their cargo to loyalist interceptors. Communications networks that the traitors assumed were secure carried information directly to Imperial intelligence services. Horus himself felt the change in ways that his corrupted advisors struggled to explain. Operations that should have proceeded smoothly encountered unexpected resistance. Allies who had seemed reliable proved unavailable when needed most. Intelligence that had flowed freely through corrupted channels dried up without warning or explanation. "Someone anticipates our movements," the War Master declared during a gathering of his closest lieutenants, his voice carrying frustration that bordered on rage. "Either we face enemies with prophetic abilities, or our security has been compromised at the highest levels. Erebus, ever present at such moments, provided reassurance that carried undertones of barely concealed concern. The gods have shown us victory, War Master. These setbacks are temporary, obstacles to be overcome rather than signs of fundamental weakness in our cause. Yet even the word-bearer's confidence seemed strained by the accumulating evidence of imperial preparedness. The rebellion that should have swept across the galaxy like wildfire instead found itself contained and channeled, its advance slowed by defenses that appeared wherever traitor forces sought to strike. The Alpha Legion watched these developments with grim satisfaction, their network providing real-time intelligence on traitor reactions to each defensive success. Operation Cerberus had evolved beyond its original scope, becoming not merely an intelligence-gathering effort, but an active strategic deception campaign that made every traitor victory cost far more than anticipated. Yet success brought its own dangers. As the scope of imperial preparedness became apparent, suspicion fell upon those who might have provided such comprehensive intelligence. The traitor Primarchs began investigating their own ranks, searching for the source of leaks that threatened their entire enterprise. The hunt for traitors within the traitor ranks would test the Alpha Legion's methods to their limits, requiring ever greater care to maintain operations that had become essential to the Imperium's survival. Each success made the next operation more dangerous. Each intelligence coup raised the stakes for those who had made such victories possible. Still, when Alpharius reviewed the intelligence flowing back from across the galaxy, he found cause for cautious optimism. The Eisenstein's arrival had triggered a cascade of consequences that shifted the war's entire character. Instead of facing surprise attacks from overwhelming forces, the Imperium would meet its enemies with foreknowledge and preparation that turned apparent weakness into carefully planned strength. The Hydra's many heads had begun to work in perfect coordination, and the galaxy itself trembled with the weight of possibilities yet to unfold. The orders arrived through channels that bore the War Master's personal authentication, their content as damning as it was explicit. The 20th Legion was to join the second wave assault on Istvan Fev, supporting the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, and Word-Bearers in what Horus described as the final crushing blow against those who had dared to challenge his authority. To any observer, the message appeared routine, another coordination directive in the endless stream of communications that marked the prosecution of the galaxy's greatest civil war. Alpharius stood in the command chamber of his flagship, the Alpha, as the decoded transmission flickered across holographic displays that cast serpentine shadows across his armored form. Around him, his most trusted captains maintained expressions of neutral attention, though each possessed full knowledge of what this moment represented. The Cabal's vision had warned of this betrayal, but experiencing its reality carried weight that prophecy alone could not convey. The War Master seeks to repeat the success of Istvan III, observed Captain Omegon, the name mask allowing his twin brother to stand openly at his side despite their usual practice of separation. 3 loyal legions against 4 corrupted ones, with the outcome predetermined by treachery rather than strength of arms. The tactical display showed the dispositions with crystalline clarity. The Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard would make the initial assault against Horus's fortified positions, their loyalty to the throne absolute despite the overwhelming odds they faced. When their advance inevitably stalled against prepared defenses, the second wave would deploy with apparent intent to reinforce their brother's assault. Instead, at the crucial moment, the supposed reinforcements would reveal their true colors and crush the loyal legions between hammer and anvil. Ferrus believes his advance will break Horus's lines through sheer determination, Alpharius said quietly, his enhanced senses reading every nuance of the tactical projections. He cannot conceive of betrayal on such scale, even after the warnings carried by the Eisenstein. The Iron Hands will charge into destruction, believing themselves supported by allies. The Alpha Legion's response required coordination that exceeded even their legendary capabilities. To the outside observer, they must appear to embrace their role in the War Master's plan, while secretly preparing to invert the entire operation. Every Marine in the Legion needed to understand his part in a deception that would determine the war's ultimate outcome. Yet that understanding could not be transmitted through any channel that might be intercepted by traitor intelligence services. The solution lay in methods that had served the Alpha Legion since their earliest days, layers of preparation and contingency that appeared routine until the moment of activation. Training exercises that seemed to focus on standard assault patterns instead rehearsed coordinated strikes against specific target signatures. Equipment loadouts that appeared optimized for fighting against fortified positions instead carried armaments perfectly suited for engaging Space Marine formations. Communications protocols that seemed designed for coordination with Allied forces instead allowed for instant redeployment against those same allies. When the Alpha Legion fleet translated into the Istvan system, they found a battlefield that matched every detail of the intelligence their operatives had gathered. Horus had chosen his ground with the same strategic acumen that had made him the Emperor's most trusted general, establishing positions that would channel attacking forces into carefully prepared kill zones. The fortress cities that dotted Istvan V's surface bristled with defensive emplacements that could shatter entire companies with concentrated fire. The loyal Primarchs approached their task with characteristic determination. Ferrus Manus led the Iron Hands with the implacable fury that marked his legion's character, his enhanced form radiating barely contained aggression as he contemplated the fortifications that stood between him and his traitorous brother. Vulcan marshaled the Salamanders with the methodical patience of one who understood the cost of war, while Corax prepared the Raven Guard for the kind of swift, decisive assault that had earned them renown across countless battlefields. "The second wave deploys in 30 minutes, came the transmission from the Loyalist Command Center, its tone carrying grim acknowledgement of the casualties the first assault would inevitably suffer. "Hold position until our advance creates opportunities for exploitation." Alpharius acknowledged the order with appropriate formality, while his true preparations reached their final stages. Across the Alpha Legion's fleet, Marines who had served together for decades confirmed their understanding of signals and protocols that would transform apparent betrayal into ultimate loyalty. The margin for error was non-existent, the window of opportunity measured in minutes rather than hours. The first wave's assault began with orbital bombardments that lit the void itself with weapon discharges on a scale that dwarfed planetary conflicts. Macro cannon shells the size of Hab blocks hammered against void shields that flickered under sustained impact, while lance batteries carved valleys across fortress walls that had stood for centuries. When the thunder finally faded, drop pods streaked toward the surface like falling stars, each one carrying warriors whose loyalty to the Emperor remained absolute despite the odds they faced. The Iron Hands struck with characteristic directness, their assault spearheaded by veteran formations that had never known defeat. Ferrus Manus led from the front, his silver hands gleaming as they crushed traitor Marines who dared stand against his advance. Behind him, the ex-Legion's warriors pressed forward with mechanical precision, their enhanced forms shrugging off defensive fire that would have devastated lesser forces. The Salamanders advanced with the measured pace of inevitable victory, Vulcan's presence anchoring their battle line against counterattacks that would have broken other formations. The 18th Legion's warriors bore the heat and flame of contested landing zones with stoic determination, their armor blackened by weapon discharges, but their resolve undimmed by the carnage surrounding them. Korax led the Raven Guard in strikes that appeared and vanished like shadows given deadly form, their assaults targeting weak points in the traitor defenses with surgical precision. The 19th Legion's warriors moved with the fluid grace of predators, each engagement calculated to maximize damage while minimizing exposure to enemy retaliation. For 3 hours, the assault progressed exactly as Horus had anticipated. The loyal legions bled against defenses that seemed to anticipate their every move, their advances measured in meters bought with the lives of heroes whose names would have blazed across imperial history under different circumstances. Communications from the front painted a picture of stalemate that gradually shifted toward inevitable defeat as ammunition ran low and casualties mounted beyond sustainable levels. Second wave, commence deployment, came the order that would decide the war's fate. Reinforce the first wave and break the traitor lines. The Alpha Legion's response carried the weight of absolute conviction. Drop pods launched with trajectories that appeared to support the loyal assault, while fleet elements moved to provide orbital fire support for their beleaguered brothers. To every observer, including the loyal Primarchs fighting desperately below, it seemed that salvation had arrived at the moment of greatest need. The deception held until the instant of truth arrived. As the second wave's forces reached optimal position, Alpharius gave the signal that would reshape the galaxy's fate. Instead of reinforcing the first wave's assault, the Alpha Legion turned their weapons toward their supposed allies among the traitor forces. The Iron Warriors, expecting to coordinate a devastating crossfire against the loyal legions, instead found themselves under attack by warriors they had trusted to stand beside them. Perturabo's reaction was immediate and violent, his enhanced senses recognizing betrayal even as his tactical mind struggled to process its implications. The Alpha Legion has turned. All units, engage the 20th Legion immediately. The Iron 4th Legion's response was characteristically methodical, their warriors pivoting with mechanical precision to engage enemies who had suddenly revealed themselves within their own battle lines. Yet the Alpha Legion's surprise was complete, their assault striking at weak points that careful observation had identified during their approach. Iron warriors who had positioned themselves to enfilade the loyal assault instead found themselves trapped in prepared kill zones, their heavy weapons useless against enemies attacking from unexpected directions. The word-bearer's response carried religious fervor alongside tactical desperation, Lorgar's presence blazing across the battlefield as he sought to rally his sons against this impossible reversal. The 17th Legion's warriors called upon dark powers that answered with fury, their chanted prayers summoning manifestations that defied physical law. Yet even demonic aid proved insufficient against enemies who had prepared for exactly such contingencies, Alpha Legion specialists deploying weapons and tactics that turned supernatural strength into liability. The Night Lords fled. Conrad Kurz' sons possessed too much experience with betrayal to stand against odds that had suddenly shifted beyond any hope of victory. The 8th Legion's warriors vanished into the fortress city's shadows, their Primarch's bitter laughter echoing across Vox channels as he contemplated the irony of plans turned against their architects. The trap becomes the trapped, Kurz's voice carried across open frequencies, its tone mixing mockery with genuine appreciation for the deception's elegance. The War Master's perfect stratagem devours itself. The effect on the first wave was immediate and decisive. Marines who had fought for hours against impossible odds suddenly found themselves reinforced by allies whose presence transformed stalemate into overwhelming advantage. The Iron Hand's advance resumed with fury, doubled by relief, while salamanders and Raven Guard forces pressed forward against defenses that could no longer concentrate their fire effectively. Ferrus Manus himself led the breakthrough that would become legend, his silver hands crushing traitor marines who had expected to witness his death rather than his triumph. The Iron Hands Primarch fought with rage, tempered by tactical brilliance, his enhanced mind processing the tactical reversal that had saved his legion from annihilation. "Brother!" Ferrus called across the battlefield as Alpharius approached through the carnage, his voice carrying acknowledgement of debt that could never be fully repaid. "Your loyalty has saved us all." The meeting of the two Primarchs came amid ruins that testified to the battle's fury, their enhanced forms unmarked by combat that had claimed thousands of lesser warriors. Around them, Marines from 4 different legions worked to secure positions that would have been graveyards without the Alpha Legion's intervention. "The Hydra serves the throne," Alpharius replied, his words carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. "We always have, though our methods may seem questionable to those who have not witnessed their necessity." Vulcan and Corax approached, with expressions that mixed gratitude with growing understanding of what they had witnessed. The 19th Primarch's stealth-adapted senses had tracked the Alpha Legion's movements throughout the battle, recognizing deception so sophisticated that it had fooled even enemy forces until the moment of revelation. "You knew," Corax observed, his voice carrying certainty despite the impossibility of what he suggested. "You knew of the trap before we walked into it." The accusation hung in the air like incense from burning cities, its implications too significant for simple denial or confirmation. Alpharius met his brother's gaze with expressions that revealed nothing while promising everything, his response carrying the weight of secrets that spanned star systems. "The Alpha Legion gathers intelligence that others cannot obtain through methods others would not employ," he said carefully. "We serve the Emperor by seeing threats before they fully manifest, by preparing for betrayals before they are committed." The explanation satisfied desperate Primarchs whose alternative was to question loyalty that had saved their legions from destruction. Yet each understood that deeper truths remained hidden, that the Alpha Legion's actions implied knowledge and preparation that exceeded normal intelligence capabilities. The strategic ramifications rippled across the galaxy with speed that exceeded even astropathic communication. News of the Istvan V victory reached loyal forces throughout the Imperium, transforming despair into renewed determination. 3 legions that should have been destroyed instead stood ready to continue the fight, their strength undiminished and their resolve hardened by the treachery they had witnessed and overcome. Horus received word of the defeat while commanding operations 3 sectors distant, his reaction visible to those who served him as raw fury that promised terrible retribution. The War Master's perfect plan had been turned against itself, his most careful preparations rendered worthless by betrayal from within his own ranks. "How?" he demanded of advisers who possessed no adequate answers. "How did they know? How did they prepare?" Erebus offered reassurance that carried undertones of barely concealed concern. "The gods have tested our resolve, War Master. This setback will be overcome." Yet even the word-bearer's confidence seemed strained by the magnitude of the reversal. The rebellion that should have been decided at Istvan V instead faced loyal forces whose strength remained intact, their morale bolstered by victory against impossible odds. The Alpha Legion's true loyalty had revealed itself at the moment of greatest consequence, and the galaxy itself trembled with the weight of possibilities reborn. The astropathic transmission that reached Horus carried news that shattered assumptions built across years of careful planning. 3 words echoed through the War Master's enhanced consciousness with the weight of absolute catastrophe. Istvan V lost. The message bore authentication codes that confirmed its veracity, despite the impossibility of what it described, each data packet adding details to a picture of defeat that defied every projection the traitor forces had constructed. The War Master stood in the strategium of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, surrounded by holographic displays that showed fleet dispositions across a dozen star systems. Moments before, those positions had represented the opening moves of a campaign that would sweep across the galaxy like wildfire, each legion positioned to strike at carefully selected targets, while loyal forces remained scattered and unprepared. Now, those same displays revealed the first cracks in a conspiracy that had required decades to construct. "Explain this," Horus commanded, his voice carrying tones that made even veteran Astartes step backward despite their conditioning. "Explain to me how Perturabo and Lorgar could be defeated by forces they outnumbered 3-1. The intelligence officers who served the War Master's court possessed no adequate explanations for what their data revealed. The Alpha Legion's betrayal had transformed certain victory into unprecedented defeat, their timing and coordination suggesting knowledge that no loyal force should have possessed. The Iron Warriors and Word-Bearers had been caught completely unprepared for attacks that struck with surgical precision at their weakest points. The reports suggest extensive preparation, offered Master of the Fleet, Boas Komnenos, his voice carefully neutral despite the magnitude of what he described. The Alpha Legion's assault patterns indicate detailed intelligence about our forces' dispositions and battle plans. The implications struck Horus like physical blows, each revelation destroying assumptions that had shaped the rebellion's entire strategic framework. If the Alpha Legion possessed such comprehensive intelligence, then other supposedly loyal forces might be similarly prepared. The element of surprise that had made the heresy possible was compromised beyond any hope of recovery. Across the galaxy, the effects of Istvan V's reversal rippled outward with devastating speed. Traitor forces that had moved to secure strategic objectives suddenly found themselves facing prepared defenses and coordinated counterattacks. Fleet elements that should have achieved swift victories instead encountered overwhelming resistance from enemies who had anticipated their every move. In the eastern fringe, the Death Guard's advance toward critical Forge worlds ground to a halt as supply convoys vanished without trace and communication networks suffered systematic disruption. Mortarian's sons discovered that worlds they had expected to find defenseless instead bristled with weapon emplacements and void shields that spoke of months rather than hours of preparation. The Word-Bearers fared no better in their assigned sectors, their fleets harassed by raiders who struck with uncanny knowledge of their routes and timetables. Lorgar's attempts to establish ritual sites for demonic summoning were consistently disrupted by forces that seemed to materialize from nowhere, carrying weapons specifically designed to counter supernatural manifestations. The Emperor's response to Istvan V's unexpected outcome exceeded even the most optimistic projections of Imperial commanders. Instead of the desperate defensive measures that Horus had anticipated, Terra's master launched immediate retaliation campaigns that struck at traitor positions across the entire galactic theater. Fleet elements that had been scattered for routine patrols received urgent recall orders, their destinations shifting from defensive postures to aggressive pursuit of retreating enemy forces. The loyal Primarchs who had survived the drop site massacre found themselves at the center of strategic planning sessions that transformed the war's entire character. Where Horus had expected to face isolated defenders fighting desperate holding actions, he instead confronted coordinated assault forces led by brothers whose tactical brilliance remained undiminished by the treachery they had endured. Ferrus Manus pressed his advantage, with the relentless fury that had earned the Iron Hands their reputation across countless battlefields. The ex-Legion's surviving forces struck at Iron Warriors' positions with mechanical precision, their assault patterns specifically designed to exploit weaknesses that conventional tactics would have missed entirely. Each engagement became a masterclass in combined arms warfare, the Iron Hands' enhanced capabilities magnified by intelligence that anticipated enemy responses before they could be implemented. Vulcan marshaled the Salamanders for campaigns that demonstrated the 18th Legion's talent for siege warfare on scales that dwarfed planetary conflicts. The Primarch of Nocturne understood that the traitor force's greatest weakness lay in their assumption of swift victory. Their supply line stretched thin by plans that had allowed no margin for extended resistance. His assault forces targeted logistics hubs and supply depots with methodical thoroughness, each strike calculated to maximize disruption while minimizing exposure to counterattack. Korax led the Raven Guard in strikes that seemed to anticipate traitor movements before they occurred, his Legion's stealth capabilities enhanced by intelligence that revealed enemy dispositions with unprecedented accuracy. The 19th Legion's warriors moved through contested space like shadows given deadly form, their assaults striking at command centers and communication nodes that left entire enemy formations blinded and isolated. The coordination between these forces spoke of preparation that exceeded normal military cooperation, their assault patterns interlocking with precision that suggested months of joint planning rather than improvised response to crisis. At the center of this coordination network stood figures whose presence on the battlefield carried implications that observant commanders found deeply troubling. Alpha Legion operatives moved openly among the loyal forces for the first time since the heresy began, their expertise in intelligence warfare proving invaluable to Primarchs who had previously viewed such methods with suspicion. The 20th Legion's contribution went beyond mere tactical support, encompassing strategic deception campaigns that left traitor commanders uncertain about loyal force dispositions across entire star systems. "Your methods are unconventional," Ferris observed during a planning session aboard his flagship, his silver hands tracing patterns across holographic displays that showed enemy fleet movements with impossible precision. Yet their effectiveness cannot be questioned. Alpharius accepted the qualified praise with expressions that revealed nothing while promising everything, his response carrying undertones of secrets that spanned decades rather than mere campaigns. "The Hydra has many heads, brother. What seems like prescience is simply the product of comprehensive preparation and patient observation." The explanation satisfied Primarchs whose alternatives involved questioning loyalty that had saved their legions from destruction, yet each understood that deeper truths remained hidden. The Alpha Legion's intelligence capabilities implied networks and methods that exceeded normal military reconnaissance by orders of magnitude. On Terra, the strategic situation underwent transformation that exceeded even Malkador's careful projections. The Sigillites' own intelligence networks had provided warning of the heresy's scope, but the Istvan Var victory offered opportunities for offensive action that previous planning had not dared consider. Instead of preparing for siege warfare that might last centuries, Imperial planners found themselves coordinating pursuit campaigns against enemies whose momentum had been shattered at the moment of their greatest triumph. The traitor forces retained significant strength, the Emperor observed during councils of war that brought together the Imperium's greatest military minds. Yet their coordination has been compromised beyond easy repair. We must press our advantage before they can adapt to these changed circumstances. The campaigns that followed demonstrated the gulf between planned rebellion and improvised resistance. Horus had spent years positioning his forces for swift, decisive action, their supply lines and communication networks optimized for rapid advance rather than sustained defense. When those plans collapsed, the traitor legions found themselves fighting the kind of attritional warfare for which they were fundamentally unprepared. The situation regarding Magnus and the Thousand Sons underwent dramatic revision as strategic priorities shifted. The Emperor's original censure of the 15th Legion for their use of psychic powers seemed less urgent when weighed against the immediate threat of 4 traitor legions in active rebellion. Messages dispatched to Leman Russ carried new orders that prioritized the pursuit of fleeing traitor forces over the punishment of loyal sons whose only crime was the use of abilities that might prove essential in the war ahead. The threat from uncontrolled psyker activity pales beside the danger of chaos corruption, Malcador advised during private sessions with the Emperor, his ancient voice carrying wisdom earned through millennia of service. Magnus's loyalty remains absolute despite his errors in judgment. His legion's abilities may prove crucial if the enemy attempts demonic manifestations on a larger scale. The reprieve granted to Prospero allowed the Thousand Sons to contribute their unique capabilities to the wider war effort, their psychic surveillance detecting traitor movements that conventional reconnaissance would have missed. Magnus himself threw his legion's full strength behind intelligence-gathering operations that complemented the Alpha Legion's more conventional methods, their combined efforts creating a surveillance network that spanned the galaxy itself. Yet perhaps the most significant transformation came through the activation of Alpha Legion assets that had remained hidden for decades. Across thousands of worlds, operatives who had maintained deep cover identities received coded transmissions that authorized them to reveal their true loyalties and begin active operations against traitor forces. The resulting intelligence coup dwarfed anything previously achieved in the history of warfare. Supply convoys that traitor forces believed were secure found themselves interdicted by forces that seemed to materialize from empty space. Communication networks that enemy commanders trusted implicitly began carrying false information that led entire fleets into carefully prepared ambushes. Most devastatingly, command structures that the traitor legions considered absolutely secure discovered that their most trusted advisors and specialists had been Alpha Legion operatives for years or even decades. The psychological impact of these revelations proved even more damaging than their tactical consequences. Traitor Marines who had believed themselves part of an unstoppable rebellion found themselves questioning the loyalty of everyone around them, their brotherhood corrupted by suspicions that made coordinated action increasingly difficult. Primarchs who had trusted their inner circles without reservation discovered that their most sensitive plans had been compromised from the moment of their conception. "How deep does their penetration reach?" Perturabo demanded during emergency sessions with his remaining officers, his voice carrying paranoia that would have been unthinkable mere weeks before. How many of our brothers serve masters other than ourselves? The questions had no satisfactory answers, their implications too vast for easy comprehension. The Alpha Legion's network had been decades in the construction, its operatives placed with patience that exceeded normal human capabilities. Rooting out such comprehensive infiltration would require resources that the traitor forces could not spare while fighting for their very survival. The strategic initiative had passed to the Loyalists completely, their forces pressing advantages that multiplied with each passing day. Where Horus had planned for swift, decisive action that would present the Imperium with irreversible facts, he instead faced protracted warfare against enemies who seemed to anticipate his every move. The rebellion that should have swept across the galaxy in months found itself contained and channeled into battlefields of the Emperor's choosing. Yet perhaps most damaging of all was the effect on the Chaos powers themselves. The entities that had invested so much effort in corrupting the War Master and his brothers found their carefully laid plans unraveling with speed that exceeded even divine comprehension. The Alpha Legion's betrayal had not merely defeated traitor forces on a single battlefield, but had shattered the entire strategic framework upon which the Dark God's victory depended. The Hydra had revealed its true nature at last, and the galaxy itself trembled with possibilities that had been reborn through loyalty tested in the crucible of ultimate betrayal. The forged orders carried authentication codes that would have deceived even the most careful scrutiny, their false authorization bearing the digital signature of the Emperor himself. Transmitted through channels that Horus controlled absolutely, the corrupted decree reached Leman Russ as he prepared his fleet for translation to the Prospero system. To the Wolf King, the message seemed to clarify what had previously been ambiguous instructions, transforming a mission of censure into one of absolute destruction. Bring Magnus to account for his sorcerous transgressions, the false orders proclaimed, their language carrying implications that no loyal son could misinterpret. Let no trace of the 1,000 sons remain to corrupt others with their forbidden practices. The Emperor's justice demands nothing less than complete eradication. Russ read the transmission with satisfaction that bordered on anticipation, his enhanced senses already focusing on the combat to come. The Wolf King had never trusted Magnus or his sorceress legion. Their reliance on psychic powers representing everything he believed threatened the Imperium's future. That the Emperor had finally recognized this threat and authorized its permanent removal seemed like validation of concerns he had harbored for decades. Yet the orders never reached their intended destination. Hidden among the Space Wolves' fleet, Alpha Legion operatives monitored communications with the same patient attention they applied to every aspect of their surveillance operations. Brother Sergeant Harkle maintained his cover as a technical specialist assigned to the flagship Hrafnkel, his presence justified by inter-legion cooperation protocols that had seemed routine when first implemented. Now, as he decoded the transmission that would doom an entire legion, those protocols proved their worth beyond any measure. The forged authentication codes revealed their nature under analysis that exceeded standard Imperial cryptographic methods, their digital signatures carrying markers that indicated tampering at the highest levels. More damning still was the message's routing, its path through communication networks that should have been secure, but showed signs of unauthorized access from sources that could only be traitor agents. Lord Russ, Harkle transmitted through channels that carried his technical credentials rather than his true identity. The orders you received require verification through alternate authentication protocols. Standard security procedures mandate confirmation before proceeding with operations of this magnitude. The Wolf King's reaction was immediate and violent, his enhanced senses recognizing challenge to his authority even when presented through proper technical channels. You question the Emperor's direct commands. Explain yourself before I have you flogged for insubordination. The moment balanced on knife's edge between revelation and catastrophe, its resolution dependent on words chosen with precision that left no margin for error. Harkle had prepared for this confrontation through months of careful observation, his understanding of Russ's character informed by intelligence gathered through sources the Wolf King could never suspect. I question nothing, my lord, Harkle replied, with tone that carried absolute conviction despite the mortal danger his words represented. I report technical anomalies in the transmission that suggest potential enemy interference. The authentication codes show patterns consistent with forgery attempts detected in previous traitor communications. The accusation struck Russ like physical blow. its implications too significant for dismissal, despite their apparent impossibility. The Wolf King possessed too much experience with warfare to ignore intelligence that might save his legion from walking into carefully prepared traps, yet his instincts rebelled against suggestions that the Emperor's own orders could be compromised. "Show me this evidence," Russ commanded, his voice carrying tones that promised terrible retribution if the technical specialist proved wrong. "Convince me that what appears to be the Emperor's will is actually enemy deception." The analysis that followed revealed layers of manipulation that exceeded even Alpha Legion projections in their sophistication. Horus had corrupted not merely the orders themselves, but the entire communication network through which they traveled, inserting false authentication at multiple levels to create the appearance of legitimate imperial authority. Only detailed forensic examination revealed the subtle markers that indicated enemy interference. "The transmission originated from compromised relay stations," Harkle reported, with tone that carried certainty despite the magnitude of what he described. "The authentication codes, while superficially correct, contain embedded markers that match patterns found in known traitor communications. This message did not originate from Terra." Russ absorbed the intelligence with expressions that mixed fury at the deception with growing understanding of its implications. If Horus possessed the capability to forge the Emperor's orders so precisely, then every communication the Space Wolves received required verification through alternate channels. The rebellion's scope exceeded anything the Wolf King had previously contemplated. "Then what are my true orders?" Russ demanded, his voice carrying anticipation of violence regardless of what those orders might contain. "What does the Emperor actually command regarding Magnus and his sorceress legion?" The answer came through communication networks that the Alpha Legion had verified through multiple independent sources, their authentication beyond any possibility of traitor interference. The true imperial decree bore language that differed significantly from Horus's corruption, its tone suggesting censure rather than destruction, justice tempered by recognition of service rather than absolute condemnation. "Magnus is to be brought to Terra for judgment regarding his violation of imperial edicts," the genuine orders stated with clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. "The 1,000 Sons are to be disbanded, and their members redistributed among loyal legions. Their psychic abilities, properly controlled and monitored, may prove valuable in the conflicts ahead." The corrected mission parameters transformed the Space Wolves' approach to Prospero entirely. Where Horus's forged orders had demanded planetary annihilation, the Emperor's true will called for surgical precision that would preserve valuable assets while addressing legitimate concerns about uncontrolled psyker activity. Russ adapted his battle plans with characteristic efficiency, his tactical modifications reflecting understanding of what the mission actually required. Yet even more significant was the warning that reached Prospero before the Space Wolves translated into the system. Alpha Legion assets within the 15th Legion had maintained careful observation of Magnus and his sons, their presence justified by the same inter-legion cooperation that had placed operatives throughout the Legion's estates. When intelligence indicated the Wolf King's approach, those assets activated with precision that saved countless lives. Magnus received the warning in his sanctum atop the pyramid of Photep, his enhanced psychic senses already detecting disturbances in the warp that spoke of approaching fleet elements. The Crimson King had spent weeks in meditation since his disastrous attempt to warn the Emperor of Horus's treachery, his consciousness still reeling from the psychic backlash that had accompanied his efforts to reach Terra through the webway. "My lord." The message arrived through channels so subtle that even Magnus's enhanced perceptions could barely detect them. "The Space Wolves approach with orders for your censure, not your destruction. The War Master has attempted to corrupt their mission, but loyal forces have preserved the Emperor's true will. Surrender peacefully and live to serve the throne in the trials ahead. The intelligence carried weight that transcended its simple words, its implications reshaping Magnus's understanding of the choices available to him. Where he had expected annihilation at the hands of his brother's fury, the message offered possibility of survival through submission to imperial justice. The price would be high: the dissolution of his legion, separation from sons who had followed him across the galaxy, yet the alternative was extinction for them all. When the Space Wolves fleet emerged from the warp above Prospero, they found a world preparing for surrender rather than siege. The orbital defenses that could have extracted terrible cost from any assault remained powered down, their weapon systems trained away from the approaching ships in gestures that spoke of submission rather than defiance. Most significantly, psychic transmissions from the planet's surface carried Magnus's own voice, offering negotiation rather than resistance. "Brother Lehman," Magnus transmitted, across void channels that crackled with barely controlled power, "I have transgressed against our father's edicts, and accept whatever punishment his justice demands. Let us speak as brothers before duty requires us to stand as judge and condemned." The meeting that followed took place in the crystalline chambers beneath Prospero's greatest pyramid, where Magnus had pursued studies that had ultimately led to his downfall. The Crimson King appeared before his brother, not in the full panoply of war, but in simple robes that spoke of penitence rather than pride. Behind him stood representatives of his legion, their expressions mixing resignation with determination to accept whatever fate awaited them. Russ approached the confrontation with characteristic directness, his massive form radiating barely contained aggression despite the peaceful nature of the meeting. The Wolf King's instincts rebelled against treating with those he considered sorcerers and oathbreakers, yet duty demanded he follow the Emperor's true commands rather than his personal inclinations. "You broke faith with the Emperor," Russ declared, his voice carrying accusation that could not be denied or deflected. "Your sorcery violated edicts that were clear beyond any possibility of misunderstanding. Why should any loyal son trust words spoken by one who has already proven himself oathbreaker?" Magnus accepted the condemnation with expressions that revealed the weight of guilt he had carried since Nicaea's prohibition of psychic practices. The Crimson King possessed too much wisdom to offer excuses for actions that had indeed violated imperial law, yet neither could he deny the desperate necessity that had driven his choices. "I sought to warn our father of Horus's treachery," Magnus replied, his voice carrying tones that mixed regret with defiant conviction. "My methods violated his edicts, yet my purpose remained loyal. I would accept damnation gladly if it preserved the Emperor's life and the Imperium's future." The words struck Russ with force that exceeded physical impact, their implications challenging assumptions that had shaped his entire approach to the mission. If Magnus spoke truth, if his sorcery had indeed been employed in desperate attempt to preserve rather than corrupt the Emperor's work, then the Thousand Sons' crimes carried complexities that simple justice could not easily address. "The War Master has indeed proven traitor," Russ acknowledged, his tone carrying grudging recognition of intelligence that had reached him through other channels. "Your warning, whatever its methods, served the throne's interests, yet that does not excuse violation of explicit imperial edicts." The negotiation that followed established terms that satisfied both honor and necessity. Magnus would submit to imperial judgment, accepting dissolution of his legion and redistribution of his sons among loyal forces. In exchange, their lives would be preserved and their abilities employed in service to the throne rather than destroyed through misguided justice. Most significantly, The confrontation allowed healing of wounds that had festered between the brothers since the Council of Nicaea. Russ's understanding of Magnus's motivations, coupled with growing appreciation for the psychic threats the Imperium faced, created foundation for cooperation that neither had previously thought possible. "Your sons possess abilities that may prove crucial in the war ahead," Russ observed, as they concluded their negotiations. "The enemies we face employ sorcery that conventional weapons cannot easily counter. Perhaps the Emperor's wisdom in preserving your legion will become clear as events unfold." Magnus nodded, with expressions that mixed gratitude with determination to prove worthy of the trust being placed in him. "The 1,000 Sons will serve wherever the throne commands. Our knowledge of psychic warfare will be employed only in defense of the Imperium, under whatever supervision the Emperor deems appropriate." The integration that followed demonstrated possibilities that few had dared contemplate. Instead of facing annihilation at their brothers' hands, the 1,000 Sons found themselves welcomed into the broader war effort as specialist auxiliaries whose unique capabilities filled crucial gaps in Imperial strategy. Their psychic surveillance complemented the Alpha Legion's conventional intelligence methods, while their knowledge of chaos corruption provided insights that proved invaluable in combating traitor sorcery. The strategic implications rippled across the galaxy with speed that exceeded astropathic communication. 2 legions that should have been destroyed or consumed by fraternal warfare instead stood ready to continue the fight, their combined strength representing resources that the traitor forces could not easily match. Horus's careful plans for dividing and destroying loyal forces had been thwarted once again, his deceptions turned against their intended purpose. Yet perhaps most significant was the precedent established for cooperation between forces that had previously viewed each other with suspicion. The reconciliation between Russ and Magnus demonstrated that even the deepest philosophical differences could be set aside when the Imperium's survival hung in the balance. Their example inspired similar cooperation throughout the loyal forces, creating unity of purpose that the traitor legions could not hope to match. The Alpha Legion watched these developments with satisfaction that transcended mere tactical success. Their intelligence networks had prevented not merely a strategic defeat, but a tragedy that would have weakened the Imperium immeasurably. The Hydra's many heads had proven once again that loyalty served through hidden methods could achieve victories that open warfare alone could never accomplish. The galaxy trembled with possibilities reborn through wisdom, chosen over vengeance, and the future itself bent toward outcomes that had seemed impossible mere days before. The intelligence that flowed through Operation Cerberus painted a picture of corruption that exceeded even the most pessimistic projections of Imperial strategists. Hidden across 17 star systems, the Word-Bearers had established ritual sites and dark temples that served purposes far removed from the Imperial truth. Each location bore the marks of activities that violated not merely military law, but the fundamental principles upon which the Great Crusade had been founded. Magnus the Red stood before hololithic displays that showed stellar cartography overlaid with psychic resonance patterns, his enhanced perceptions tracking flows of warp energy that conventional augurs could not detect. The Crimson King's abilities, now turned toward hunting rather than forbidden research, revealed connections between word-bearer installations that formed geometric patterns across the galaxy itself. Each node in the network pulsed with malevolent energy that spoke of rituals designed to weaken the barriers between realities. "They seek to open permanent gateways," Magnus observed, his voice carrying tones of professional horror at the implications of what the data revealed. "These sites are not merely temples, but anchors for entities that exist beyond the material realm. If they succeed in their work, the consequences will extend far beyond simple military rebellion." Alpharius absorbed the intelligence with expressions that revealed nothing while calculating everything, his enhanced mind already formulating responses to threats that transcended conventional warfare. The Alpha Legion's network had provided the locations and approximate strength of word-bearer forces, while the Thousand Suns' psychic surveillance revealed the true nature of activities being conducted at those sites. Combined, the intelligence created opportunities for surgical strikes that could cripple the 17th Legion's capacity for supernatural warfare. 17 targets across 4 sectors, Alpharius noted, his tactical analysis passing the data with mechanical precision, each defended by forces that include both word-bearer Marines and other entities. Standard assault patterns will prove inadequate against enemies that do not conform to normal physical limitations. The planning sessions that followed brought together capabilities that had never been combined in Imperial history. Ferrus Manus contributed the Iron Hand's expertise in siege warfare and heavy assault, while Vulcan provided the Salamander's knowledge of flame weapons that could prove effective against supernatural enemies. Corax offered the Raven Guard's talents for rapid deployment and precision strikes, ensuring that simultaneous attacks could be coordinated across impossible distances. Yet perhaps most significantly, the preserved Thousand Suns brought knowledge of psychic warfare that transformed the entire campaign's character. Where conventional forces might have found themselves helpless against demonic manifestations, the 15th Legion's warriors carried weapons and techniques specifically designed to combat enemies that existed partially beyond the material realm. The rituals require specific astronomical alignments, Brother Epistolary Uthizar of the Thousand Suns explained during briefings that would have been impossible mere weeks before. Disrupt the ceremonies at the moment of conjunction, and the summoned entities will be banished back to the warp. Miss that window, and the manifestations may achieve permanent materialization in our reality. The timing requirements meant that all 17 sites would need to be struck within a 6-hour window, their assault forces coordinating across light years to achieve simultaneous disruption of rituals that had been years in preparation. Such coordination would have been impossible without the Alpha Legion's communication networks and the Thousand Suns' psychic surveillance, their combined capabilities creating intelligence gathering and coordination abilities that exceeded anything previously achieved in Imperial military history. The assault began with orbital bombardments that lit the void with weapon discharges, calibrated to disrupt psychic resonances rather than simply destroy physical targets. Specialized ammunition, developed through collaboration between Thousand Suns, Sorcerer Smiths, and Iron Hand's Tech Marines, carried null field generators that could temporarily sever connections between the material realm and the warp. Where conventional weapons might have merely damaged stone and metal, these rounds struck at the fundamental forces that allowed supernatural entities to manifest in physical space. On the world of Kur, where Lorgar had first established his dark temples decades before, the salamanders struck with flamers that burned not merely with promethium, but with psychic fire that could purge corruption from the very atoms of matter. Vulcan led the assault personally, his massive form radiating determination, as he contemplated structures that had been sacred to the imperial truth before the word-bearers' corruption transformed them into abominations. The Iron Hands descended upon the fortress world of Galmec with mechanical precision that brooked no resistance. Ferrus Manus driving his forces through defensive lines that included both space marines and entities that defied classification. The ex-Legion's warriors fought with augmented systems that protected them from psychic attacks, their enhanced forms shrugging off supernatural assaults that would have driven normal humans to madness. Corax led the Raven Guard in strikes against ritual sites hidden in asteroid fields and dead worlds, his Legion's stealth capabilities allowing them to approach targets that should have been protected by supernatural detection methods. The 19th Legion's warriors moved like shadows given deadly purpose, their assaults disrupting ceremonies moments before critical conjunctions could be achieved. Yet perhaps the most crucial engagement took place on the world of Sycharis, where Erebus himself had established the largest ritual complex in the Word-Bearers network. The first chaplain's presence anchored manifestations that exceeded anything previously recorded in imperial archives, his enhanced form serving as conduit for powers that existed beyond the galaxy's physical boundaries. Alpharius came for Erebus personally. The Alpha Legion's assault on Sycharis combined every technique they had developed across decades of warfare, their approach routes calculated to avoid detection by both conventional sensors and supernatural perception. The Primarch himself led the strike force that penetrated the ritual complex's innermost chambers, his enhanced senses tracking psychic emanations that led directly to his target. The confrontation took place in a chamber that hurt to perceive directly, its walls inscribed with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when observed. Erebus stood at the center of a summoning circle carved from materials that were not entirely matter, his enhanced form crackling with energies that spoke of pacts made with entities that demanded terrible prices for their aid. "So the Hydra reveals its true nature, at last," Erebus declared, his voice carrying harmonics that bypassed conscious thought to strike directly at primal fears. "Do you truly believe that loyalty to the Corpse Emperor can stand against powers that predate your species by eons?" Alpharius ignored the taunts, his attention focused on combat calculations that accounted for enemies whose capabilities transcended normal physical limitations. The Alpha Legion Primarch carried weapons that had been blessed by the Thousand Suns' most accomplished psychers, their edges wreathed in null fields that could sever connections between the material realm and the warp. The duel that followed would have been impossible to describe to those who had not witnessed supernatural combat, its participants moving through dimensions that normal perception could not encompass. Erebus wielded powers that allowed him to strike from angles that did not exist in conventional space, while Alpharius countered with techniques that disrupted the fundamental forces that made such attacks possible. "You understand nothing," Erebus snarled, as null field weapons disrupted his connection to chaos entities that had granted him inhuman capabilities. "The gods offer power beyond imagining, dominion over reality itself. Your loyalty chains you to weakness when strength lies within your grasp." "I understand enough," Alpharius replied, his voice carrying certainty that transcended doubt. "I understand that power bought through corruption always demands prices that exceed its value. The Alpha Legion serves the throne, not alien entities that would devour the galaxy." The moment of Erebus's capture came when psychic disruption fields activated throughout the ritual complex, severing his connections to supernatural sources of power and leaving him vulnerable to purely physical assault. Alpharius struck with precision that spoke of careful planning, his weapons designed to incapacitate rather than kill, to preserve a source of intelligence whose value could not be measured. The interrogation that followed provided insights into chaos corruption that transformed imperial understanding of the threats they faced. Under techniques that the Alpha Legion had perfected across decades of intelligence gathering, Erebus revealed the scope of the Word-Bearers' conspiracy, their connections to entities that existed beyond the galaxy's physical boundaries, and most crucially, the rituals and practices that allowed such corruption to spread. "The rituals are not merely religious observances," Erebus declared under chemical and psychic compulsion that made deception impossible. "They are practical techniques for accessing power that your Corpse Emperor forbids. Each world we corrupt becomes an anchor point for forces that will ultimately devour your precious Imperium." The intelligence provided tactical advantages that rippled across the entire war effort. Imperial forces gained understanding of how to detect chaos corruption in its early stages, techniques for disrupting supernatural rituals before they could achieve their intended effects, and most importantly, methods for countering the psychic weapons that traitor forces had begun employing with increasing frequency. Yet perhaps the most significant achievement was the capture of entities that had been summoned, but not yet banished, when the ritual sites were disrupted. For the first time in Imperial history, live Chaos Daemons fell into Loyalist hands, their imprisonment achieved through techniques that combined Alpha Legion operational expertise with Thousand Sons' psychic mastery. The study of these entities, conducted under conditions of absolute security within the deepest vaults of Terror itself, provided insights that would prove invaluable as the war progressed. Imperial researchers gained understanding of Chaos capabilities and limitations that no theoretical study could have provided, knowledge that translated directly into improved weapons and defensive techniques. "They are not truly immortal," Magnus reported during briefings that brought together the Imperium's greatest minds. "These entities exist primarily in the warp, manifesting in our reality only through specific rituals and anchor points. Disrupt those connections, and even the most powerful demon becomes vulnerable to conventional weapons." The exposure of word-bearer corruption shocked the Imperium to its foundations, revelations about the 17th Legion's activities spreading through astropathic networks with speed that exceeded normal communication. Worlds that had welcomed word-bearer preachers found themselves subject to intense scrutiny, while Imperial forces began systematic searches for hidden temples and ritual sites that might have escaped detection. The psychological impact on remaining traitor forces proved even more devastating than the tactical victories. Horus's rebellion, already struggling against coordinated Loyalist resistance, faced new challenges as evidence of chaos corruption became impossible to deny. Marines who had followed their Primarchs into rebellion for reasons of honor or ambition found themselves confronting evidence that their cause served entities that sought humanity's destruction rather than its advancement. Some word-bearer companies, horrified by revelations about their legion's true activities, sought reconciliation with Imperial forces despite the risks such overtures entailed. These defections provided additional intelligence about traitor operations, while demonstrating that even the most corrupted forces retained individuals whose loyalty to humanity transcended their allegiance to fallen Primarchs. Lorgar himself vanished into the warp's chaotic currents rather than face capture, his escape achieved through rituals that required the sacrifice of entire companies of his own Marines. The Horizon's flight removed one of Chaos Corruption's greatest champions from the material realm, though intelligence suggested his influence would continue through agents and cults that had been years in establishment. The campaign's success resonated across the galaxy, with effects that exceeded purely military considerations. For the first time since the heresy began, Loyalist forces had achieved decisive victory against enemies that wielded supernatural weapons, their triumph demonstrating that Chaos Corruption was not invincible when faced with proper preparation and coordinated response. The Hydra had bared its fangs against powers that existed beyond the material realm, and even entities that claimed dominion over reality itself trembled before loyalty tested in the crucible of absolute corruption. The approach to Terra revealed a world transformed beyond recognition, its orbital space crowded with defensive stations and monitoring platforms that spoke of preparation on a scale that exceeded anything previously attempted in Imperial history. Where once the throne world had relied upon symbolic defenses that emphasized its role as humanity's spiritual center, the installations that now surrounded the cradle of the species carried weapons capable of reducing entire fleets to component atoms within minutes. Alpharius observed these changes from the command deck of the Alpha as his flagship translated into the Sol system, his enhanced senses cataloguing modifications that revealed the hand of master strategists at work. Rogel Dawn's influence was unmistakable in the mathematical precision of weapon placement and overlapping fields of fire, while newer additions carried signatures that spoke of innovations born from recent combat experience against supernatural enemies. "The 7th Legion has been busy," observed Captain Omegon, his presence aboard the flagship drawing no attention from those who didn't know to look for subtle differences in bearing and vocal patterns. Yet even Dawn's thoroughness has limitations. There remain vulnerabilities that conventional military thinking cannot address. The observation carried weight that transcended its simple words, implications that reached to the heart of the Alpha Legion's unique capabilities. Where other forces concentrated on obvious approaches and standard defensive doctrine, the 20th Legion understood that true security required preparation against threats that conventional wisdom couldn't anticipate. Their arrival at Terra marked not merely the deployment of another loyal legion, but the beginning of defensive preparations that would transform the throne world into something unprecedented in galactic history. The meeting with Rogel Dawn took place within the deepest chambers of the Imperial Palace, where the Praetorian of Terra had established command centers that could coordinate defensive operations across entire star systems. The Lord of the Imperial Fists received his brother with expressions that mixed professional respect with carefully controlled suspicion, his analytical mind still processing the implications of intelligence capabilities that the Alpha Legion had demonstrated throughout the war. "Your arrival is timely," Dawn stated with characteristic directness, his golden armor reflecting the light of holographic displays that showed defensive dispositions throughout the Sol system. "The fortification of Terra proceeds according to schedule, but additional capabilities will prove valuable as the war's scope continues to expand." Alpharius accepted the greeting with tone that carried undertones of secrets yet to be revealed, his response calculated to inform without alarming his brother about the true scope of preparations that the Alpha Legion had been implementing for years. "The 20th Legion brings unique expertise to defensive operations, brother. Methods that complement rather than compete with the excellent work your sons have already accomplished." The briefing that followed revealed defensive preparations that dwarfed anything previously attempted in imperial military history. Dawn had transformed Terra's orbital space into a killing ground that could destroy any conceivable assault fleet, while planetary defenses created layered zones of fire that left no avenue of approach uncovered. Yet even these massive preparations contained gaps that conventional military thinking could not address, vulnerabilities that required unconventional solutions. "Infiltration remains the greatest threat," Dawn acknowledged, with tone that revealed frustration at problems that mathematical precision could not easily solve. "However thorough our screening procedures, the enemy possesses capabilities that exceed normal detection methods. Traditional security measures prove inadequate against enemies who can alter their very appearance or manipulate perception itself." The solution lay in assets that had been positioned throughout Terra's population for decades, Alpha Legion operatives whose deep cover identities had made them invisible to even the most thorough security investigations. Where conventional counterintelligence relied upon behavioral analysis and technical surveillance, the 20th Legion's network encompassed individuals whose loyalty had been verified through methods that left no possibility of deception. "Activation Protocol 7, Alpharius transmitted, through channels so subtle that even Dawn's enhanced senses could barely detect them. "Full deployment authorized. Imperial protection, priority absolute." Across Terra's vast metropolitan centers and industrial complexes, the response was immediate and comprehensive. Citizens whose true loyalties had remained hidden for decades revealed themselves as Alpha Legion operatives, their positions throughout the Throne World's infrastructure providing surveillance capabilities that exceeded anything conventional military forces could achieve. Factory supervisors became intelligence coordinators, while maintenance technicians transformed into weapons specialists, whose equipment had always been more sophisticated than their apparent roles suggested. The defensive network that emerged from this activation exceeded even Alpharius's careful projections in its comprehensiveness. Where Dawn's fortifications created physical barriers against conventional assault, the Alpha Legion's hidden infrastructure provided intelligence gathering and rapid response capabilities that could counter threats before they fully manifested. Every transportation hub, every communication center, every gathering place that might serve enemy infiltrators found itself under observation by operatives whose presence remained undetectable to those who did not know the proper recognition signals. "Your preparations are extensive," Dawn observed, as briefings revealed the true scope of Alpha Legion assets throughout Terra's population. "How long have these networks been in position?" The question struck at the heart of the Alpha Legion's operational doctrine, their methods requiring preparation that spanned decades rather than mere campaigns. Alpharius met his brother's gaze with expressions that revealed nothing while acknowledging everything. His response carrying implications that extended far beyond simple military planning. "The Hydra has always served the throne's protection," Alpharius replied, with tone that carried certainty beyond question. "These preparations began the day we first set foot upon Terra's soil. True security requires patience that exceeds normal military timelines." The transformation that followed demonstrated the Alpha Legion's unique contribution to Terra's defense. Where conventional fortifications relied upon obvious strength to deter attack, the 20th Legion's modifications created deception on a scale that made the entire throne world into a single massive trap. Transportation tunnels that appeared to lead toward the Imperial Palace instead channeled potential attackers into kill zones that could be sealed and flooded with weapons fire. Communications networks that seemed vulnerable to infiltration actually fed false information to enemy agents while providing loyal forces with perfect intelligence about traitor movements. Most significantly, the Imperial Palace itself underwent modifications that transformed the Emperor's residence into a labyrinth that defied conventional understanding. Corridors that appeared to lead in straight lines actually curved through dimensions that normal perception could not encompass, while chambers that seemed small from the outside contained defensive positions that could accommodate entire companies of Space Marines. The Alpha Legion's expertise in misdirection, enhanced by techniques learned from captured Chaos artifacts, created a fortress that existed partially beyond normal space. The coordination of Loyalist refugee operations provided another demonstration of the Alpha Legion's unique capabilities. Across the galaxy, Imperial citizens whose worlds had fallen to traitor forces or stood threatened by advancing enemy fleets found themselves offered evacuation to prepared safe zones that conventional intelligence suggested didn't exist. The transportation networks that achieved these rescues operated through routes that avoided all known enemy surveillance, their existence hidden even from other loyal forces to prevent accidental compromise. 17 million civilians evacuated in the past month alone, reported Brother Captain Icon during briefings that revealed the scope of Alpha Legion humanitarian operations. Each transport follows different routes, utilizes different identification protocols, arrives at different destinations. Even complete intelligence compromise would reveal only fragments of the overall network. The refugees themselves found sanctuary in facilities that had been prepared across Terra's vast metropolitan areas, their integration into the throne world's population achieved through documentation and support systems that appeared to have existed for decades, where conventional refugee operations created obvious targets for enemy infiltration or sabotage. The Alpha Legion's methods distributed rescued populations so thoroughly that tracking them would require surveillance capabilities that exceeded even the most sophisticated intelligence networks. Yet perhaps the most significant transformation came through the integration of intelligence gathered from captured chaos entities and interrogated traitors. The knowledge gained from Erebus and the imprisoned demons provided insights into supernatural infiltration methods that conventional security could never detect, enabling defensive preparations specifically designed to counter enemies that existed partially beyond the material realm. Psychic detection networks, developed through collaboration between the Alpha Legion and Thousand Sons specialists, created overlapping fields of surveillance that could identify chaos corruption before it achieved dangerous manifestation. Where normal security relied upon physical observation and behavioral analysis, these enhanced systems detected the subtle warp disturbances that accompanied demonic presence or psychic manipulation. The enemy possesses capabilities that transcend normal stealth, Magnus observed during planning sessions that brought together the Imperium's greatest defensive minds. Yet even supernatural concealment creates disturbances that can be detected through proper preparation and appropriate sensing equipment. The culmination of these preparations came through personal audience with the Emperor himself, a meeting that took place within the deepest chambers of the Imperial Palace, where reality itself bent to the master of mankind's will. Alpharius approached the Golden Throne not as supplicant seeking favor, but as loyal son reporting the completion of duties that had shaped his legion's purpose since their first founding. The Emperor's presence filled the chamber with authority that made even Primarchs feel small, his golden form radiating power that spoke of capabilities beyond mortal understanding. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond the merely physical, each word weighted with significance that transcended simple communication. Your loyalty has exceeded every expectation, my son, the Emperor declared, his words carrying approval that Alpharius had never dared hope to receive. The preparations you have made will serve the Imperium's needs in trials yet to come. Your methods, though unconventional, have proven their worth beyond any doubt. The recognition carried weight that transformed the Alpha Legion's role within the broader Imperial hierarchy, where once they had operated in shadows and uncertainty, always questioning whether their methods truly served the throne's interests. The Emperor's approval provided validation that their sacrifice and dedication had achieved their intended purpose. "The Hydra serves," Alpharius replied, his voice carrying conviction that had been tested in the crucible of absolute loyalty. "We always have, though our service has required methods that others might not understand or approve." The Emperor's response revealed depths of understanding that few mortals could comprehend, his enhanced perception recognizing the true scope of sacrifice that the Alpha Legion's loyalty had required. Understanding comes through necessity rather than comfort, my son. The trials ahead will test every capability the Imperium possesses. Your preparations have ensured that we will meet those trials from a position of strength rather than desperation. The transformation of Terra into humanity's ultimate fortress represented more than mere defensive preparation, embodying the fundamental change in the war's character that Alpharius's loyalty had achieved. Where Horus had planned to find a desperate and divided Imperium, fighting losing battles against overwhelming odds, he would instead face coordinated resistance from enemies who had anticipated his every move and prepared countermeasures that exceeded his worst fears. The throne world stood ready not merely to endure siege, but to serve as the center of a galactic campaign that would hunt down traitor forces wherever they might flee. The Alpha Legion's hidden networks provided intelligence capabilities that spanned the galaxy, while Terra's enhanced defenses created a sanctuary from which loyal forces could coordinate operations across impossible distances. Most importantly, the psychological impact of Terra's transformation resonated throughout the loyal forces. Where uncertainty and defensive thinking had previously shaped Imperial strategy, the knowledge that the throne world stood prepared for any conceivable threat allowed military commanders to pursue aggressive campaigns with confidence that their ultimate sanctuary remained secure. The Hydra had coiled around humanity's heart, its many heads watching for threats that conventional vigilance might miss, and the galaxy itself trembled with the weight of defenses that exceeded mortal understanding. The intelligence arrived through channels so secure that even their existence remained classified at the highest levels of Imperial command, data fragments assembled from sources scattered across the galaxy's war-torn expanse. Hidden among routine fleet disposition reports and supply manifest updates, the pattern emerged slowly at first, then with growing clarity that spoke of enemy preparations exceeding anything previously recorded in the conflict's history. Moloch. The name carried significance that transcended its simple designation as another Imperial world, implications that reached back to the earliest days of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor himself had walked its surface for purposes that remained shrouded in official secrecy. Yet the Alpha Legion's intelligence networks had uncovered fragments of truth about that ancient visitation, enough to understand why Horus would risk everything to reach a world whose strategic value seemed minimal to conventional analysis. The War Master gathers his remaining strength for a single decisive thrust, reported Brother Captain Ingo Petch during briefings that brought together the Alpha Legion's most skilled intelligence analysts. Fleet elements from across 4 sectors are converging on coordinates that place Moloch at their center. This is not a conventional military operation, but something far more significant. Alpharius absorbed the intelligence with expressions that revealed the weight of recognition, his enhanced mind processing implications that extended far beyond mere tactical considerations. The Cabal's vision had warned of powers beyond the material realm that sought to corrupt the galaxy through willing servants, entities that offered dominion in exchange for damnation. If Horus sought to reach Moloch, it could only be for purposes connected to those same dark forces. How long before the War Master's forces achieve optimal position? Alpharius inquired, his tactical analysis already calculating response times and deployment options that could intercept enemy operations before they reached critical phases. 18 days, assuming current fleet velocities and no significant course corrections, Peck replied with precision that spoke of careful observation and detailed projection. Yet intelligence suggests the enemy considers this time frame critical for reasons beyond our current understanding. Delay beyond that window may eliminate whatever opportunity the War Master seeks to exploit. The coordination required to respond to this threat exceeded anything previously attempted in the war's prosecution, demanding cooperation between forces that had been scattered across the galaxy in pursuit of separate objectives. Yet the strategic importance of preventing Horus from achieving his goals on Moloch outweighed all other considerations, requiring immediate redeployment of assets regardless of ongoing operations elsewhere. Ferrus Manus received the recall orders while prosecuting siege operations against Iron Warriors' strongholds in the Talan system, his reaction mixing frustration at leaving enemies unconquered with recognition that greater threats demanded priority. The Iron Hands Primarch understood strategic necessity as clearly as any of his brothers, his tactical genius recognizing that preventing enemy enhancement exceeded the value of any localized victory. Vulcan abandoned pursuit operations against fleeing word-bearer remnants to answer Alpharius's summons, the Salamander's fleet elements translating out of the warp at coordinates calculated to achieve optimal interception geometry. The 18th Legion's expertise in siege warfare and close-quarters combat would prove invaluable if the engagement extended to planetary surface operations. Corax responded with characteristic speed, the Raven Guard's rapid deployment capabilities allowing them to reach the rendezvous point ahead of schedule, despite their greater initial distance from Molech. The 19th Legion's stealth expertise would provide crucial advantages in any engagement against forces that might possess supernatural detection capabilities. Yet perhaps most significantly, Magnus the Red committed the Thousand Suns to the operation with an urgency that transcended normal military considerations. The Crimson King's psychic perceptions had detected disturbances in the warp that spoke of entities beyond mortal understanding, focusing their attention on events yet to unfold around Molech's orbit. The powers that corrupted Horus seek to grant him capabilities that will make him effectively invincible, Magnus warned during strategic planning sessions conducted through psychically shielded communication networks. If he succeeds in whatever ritual he plans to conduct, the war's outcome may be decided regardless of our conventional military advantages. The combined fleet that assembled above Molech carried more firepower than most sector fleets possessed, its formation demonstrating coordination between forces that had learned to function as a unified command structure despite their different tactical doctrines. At its heart stood the Alpha Legion's vessels, their sensor arrays and communication networks providing the intelligence coordination that allowed such diverse forces to operate with perfect synchronization. Horus arrived at Molech with hubris that bordered on divine confidence, his massive fleet bearing the scars of dozens of engagements, while radiating the dark power that marked their allegiance to entities beyond the galaxy's physical boundaries. The War Master's flagship, Vengeful Spirit, led a formation that included survivors from multiple traitor legions, their combined strength representing everything Chaos could still muster for this crucial operation. The battle that followed would be remembered as one of the war's most decisive engagements, its outcome determining whether the rebellion would gain power sufficient to challenge the Emperor directly or face defeat through the gradual attrition that conventional warfare imposed. Yet even before the first weapons fired, the conflict's character was shaped by intelligence disparities that favored the loyalist forces completely. Enemy fleet composition confirms intelligence projections, reported Master of Signals Kai Zelion from his position aboard the Alpha. The War Master commands approximately 400 vessels, including 12 battle barges and 43 heavy cruisers. Significant, but not overwhelming given our combined strength and tactical advantages. Alpharius coordinated the Loyalist response with precision that spoke of months rather than days of preparation, his battle plans accounting for enemy capabilities that included both conventional weapons and supernatural enhancements. The Alpha Legion's vessels took positions that appeared supportive rather than commanding, their actual role involving intelligence coordination and target designation for allies whose firepower exceeded their own. The opening engagement began with long-range bombardments that lit the void with weapon discharges visible from Molech's surface, macro-cannon shells and lance beams crossing impossible distances to strike at enemies who had expected to face token resistance rather than coordinated opposition. The traitor fleet's formation, optimized for rapid planetary assault rather than void warfare against prepared enemies, began taking casualties before they could achieve effective firing positions. Horus himself led the desperate thrust toward Molech's surface, his personal transport supported by the heaviest escorts his fleet could provide. The War Master understood that his only chance for success lay in reaching the world's ancient sites before loyal forces could prevent whatever ritual he intended to conduct, his desperation driving tactics that sacrificed fleet elements to buy time for planetary descent. The Iron Hands met this assault with characteristic directness, Ferrus Manus leading boarding actions against traitor vessels with the implacable fury that marked his legion's approach to void warfare. The ex-legion's warriors fought with augmented systems that proved devastatingly effective against enemies whose supernatural enhancements had not prepared them for opponents immune to fear or intimidation. Vulcan coordinated defensive patterns that channeled enemy breakthrough attempts into overlapping fields of fire, the Salamander's expertise in close-range combat proving crucial when traitor forces achieved boarding range despite loyalist numerical superiority. The 18th Legion's flamers purged corruption from void-capable craft with thoroughness that left no possibility of enemy survival. Yet perhaps most devastating was the Raven Guard's systematic elimination of traitor command vessels, Korax leading precision strikes that targeted enemy coordination centers with surgical accuracy. The 19th Legion's stealth capabilities allowed them to approach targets that should have been protected by overlapping defensive screens, their assaults decapitating enemy command structures before effective responses could be coordinated. The Thousand Suns provided psychic surveillance that revealed enemy movements before they could achieve tactical surprise, Magnus personally countering supernatural enhancements that traitor psychers attempted to employ against loyal forces. The 15th Legion's abilities proved crucial in negating chaos-influenced tactics that might otherwise have turned the engagement in the enemy's favor. The decisive moment came when Horus himself attempted to break through loyalist lines aboard the Vengeful Spirit, his flagship pushing toward Molech's surface with weapons blazing and void shields straining under concentrated fire from multiple directions. The War Master's personal presence aboard the vessel marked it as the battle's true objective, success or failure determined by whether he could reach the world's ancient gates. Alpharius intercepted the War Master's thrust personally, the Alpha's weapon systems coordinating with allied vessels to create a wall of fire that even the Vengeful Spirit's massive bulk could not penetrate. The engagement that followed tested both vessels beyond their design limits, armor plating stripped away by weapons fire, while internal systems strained under damage that would have crippled lesser craft. "Target the enemy flagship's engine assemblies," Alpharius commanded, through communication networks that allowed real-time coordination between dozens of vessels. Deny them the mobility to reach planetary insertion range. The War Master's goals are achievable only through surface operations. The concentrated fire that followed systematically crippled the Vengeful Spirit's propulsion systems, leaving Horus's flagship drifting in space, while its weapon systems continued firing at targets beyond effective range. The War Master's frustrated rage echoed across void channels as he watched his opportunity slip away, the ancient gates of Molech remaining tantalizingly beyond his reach. The aftermath revealed intelligence that transformed understanding of the threats the Imperium faced. Captured vessels yielded artifacts and documents that spoke of chaos corruption extending far beyond simple military rebellion, including detailed plans for rituals that would have granted Horus power comparable to the Emperor himself. Most significantly, the intelligence revealed locations of additional sites throughout the galaxy where similar empowerment might be attempted. The enemy possesses knowledge of gates scattered across dozens of worlds, Magnus reported during post-battle analysis that brought together the Imperium's greatest military minds. Each represents a potential source of power that could tip the war's balance if exploited successfully. Our victory here has denied them one such opportunity, but others remain. Horus's retreat from Moloch marked more than mere tactical defeat, representing a fundamental shift in the rebellion's trajectory that weakened traitor morale across the galaxy. The War Master, who had once seemed invincible, now appeared vulnerable, his plans consistently thwarted by enemies who anticipated his every move and possessed resources to counter even his most desperate gambits. The psychological impact on traitor forces proved even more devastating than their material losses. Word of the Moloch defeat spread through astropathic networks with speed that exceeded official communications, carrying implications that loyal forces had achieved decisive superiority in both conventional warfare and supernatural conflict. Defections from traitor ranks accelerated as Marines who had followed their primarchs into rebellion began questioning whether their cause could achieve victory against such comprehensive opposition. Yet perhaps most significantly, the chaos entities that had corrupted the War Master began withdrawing their support as his failures mounted beyond acceptable limits. Powers that had promised dominion in exchange for service found their investment yielding diminishing returns, their attention shifting toward other potential servants who might prove more successful in achieving their goals. Alpharius observed these developments with satisfaction that transcended mere tactical success. His strategic vision, recognizing that the Moloch victory had achieved something far more valuable than preventing enemy enhancement. The rebellion that had once seemed capable of sweeping across the galaxy now faced inevitable defeat through accumulating failures that eroded both capability and will to continue fighting. The Hydra had bared its fangs at the moment of greatest consequence, and even entities that claimed dominion over reality itself discovered that loyalty tested in the crucible of absolute corruption could achieve victories that exceeded mortal understanding. The strategic situation had transformed beyond recognition in the months following Moloch, the galaxy's balance of power shifting from precarious equilibrium to overwhelming loyalist advantage, with speed that left even veteran commanders struggling to adapt their thinking. Where once Imperial forces had fought desperately to preserve scattered strongholds against coordinated traitor advances, they now pressed offensive campaigns that swept across entire star systems with the inexorable momentum of natural forces. From the depths of the Sol system, coordination networks that had been designed to coordinate desperate defense instead orchestrated pursuit operations that spanned the galaxy's breadth. Terror itself had become not merely humanity's last refuge, but the command center for a war effort that reached into every corner of known space with intelligence gathering and strategic coordination capabilities that exceeded anything previously achieved in Imperial history. Alpharius stood before holographic displays that showed fleet dispositions across 200 star systems, each formation positioned according to intelligence that revealed traitor movements before they could achieve strategic coherence. The Alpha Legion's networks, enhanced by capabilities developed through collaboration with the Thousand Suns and refined through experience gained in countless engagements, provided real-time awareness of enemy activities that made coordinated resistance increasingly impossible. The Death Guard have abandoned their positions in the Scarus sector, reported Brother Captain Arkad Fenn, his analysis drawing from sources that spanned multiple legions and dozens of intelligence networks. Mortarian's fleet elements are withdrawing toward the eastern fringe, their formations suggesting desperate flight rather than strategic repositioning. The intelligence painted a picture of systematic collapse that exceeded even optimistic projections of loyalist success. Traitor forces that had once moved with confident coordination now fled in isolation, their communication networks compromised beyond repair, while their supply lines faced constant interdiction from enemies who seemed to anticipate their every requirement. Pluto, the outermost sentinel of humanity's birth system, had undergone transformation that symbolized the war's changed character. Where conventional strategic thinking might have positioned defensive installations to guard against approaching enemies, the dwarf planet now served as the primary staging area for offensive operations that struck deep into traitor-held territory. Its augmented facilities processed intelligence from across the galaxy while coordinating supply operations that kept loyalist fleets operational at impossible distances from their home bases. Fleet dispositions confirm readiness for Operation Nemesis, observed Captain Omegon during briefings that brought together representatives from every loyal legion. 37 battle groups positioned across 12 sectors, each equipped for extended independent operations. The coordination requirements exceed anything previously attempted in Imperial military history. The scale of the campaign that emerged from these preparations dwarfed any previous Imperial military operation, its scope encompassing not merely the destruction of enemy forces, but the systematic dismantling of infrastructure that had supported the rebellion across its entire existence. Where traitor forces had expected to find sanctuary in distant sectors beyond loyalist reach, they instead discovered that Alpha Legion intelligence networks had identified every hideout, every supply depot, every potential refuge they might have sought. Ferrus Manus led the Iron Hands in campaigns that demonstrated the ex-Legion's talent for siege warfare on scales that exceeded planetary conflicts, their assault forces reducing traitor strongholds that had stood for years to component atoms within days. The Gorgon's tactical brilliance, enhanced by intelligence that revealed enemy dispositions with unprecedented accuracy, achieved victories that became legends among loyalist forces throughout the galaxy. The Iron Warriors have fortified themselves on Castellax, Ferrus reported, during strategic coordination sessions that brought together the Imperium's greatest military minds. Perturabo believes his defenses can withstand any assault we might mount. He underestimates what comprehensive intelligence can achieve when combined with appropriate application of force. The siege that followed demonstrated the futility of static defense against enemies who possessed perfect knowledge of defensive capabilities and unlimited time to prepare appropriate countermeasures. The Iron Hands' assault pierced fortifications that should have withstood conventional attack for years, their advance routes calculated to exploit weaknesses that Perturabo himself had not recognized until breaching charges detonated within his innermost strongholds. Vulcan coordinated simultaneous campaigns across 3 different sectors, the Salamander's expertise in flame warfare proving devastatingly effective against traitor installations that relied upon concealment rather than strength for protection. The 18th Legion's warriors purged corruption from worlds that had harbored word-bearer cults for decades, their flamers ensuring that no trace remained of the supernatural contamination that had made such hideouts possible. Each world cleansed represents a victory that extends beyond mere military success, Vulcan observed, as his forces completed operations that had eliminated traitor presence from 17 star systems within a single month. We do not merely defeat enemies, but restore the Emperor's light to places that had been lost to darkness. Corax led the Raven Guard in pursuit operations that gave fleeing traitor forces no respite, his legion's stealth capabilities allowing them to track enemies through territory that should have provided perfect concealment. The 19th Legion's warriors struck at supply convoys and communication relays with precision that left traitor commanders uncertain about their force's actual strength or disposition. The psychological impact of these systematic defeats proved even more devastating than their material consequences. Traitor Marines who had followed their primarchs into rebellion with confidence born of early victories found themselves fighting a war where every advantage lay with their enemies, where careful plans collapsed before they could be implemented, and desperate gambits achieved nothing beyond accelerating their ultimate defeat. Magnus the Red provided psychic surveillance that revealed enemy movements before they could achieve tactical coherence, his abilities enhanced by knowledge gained through the interrogation of captured chaos entities and the study of artifacts recovered from disrupted ritual sites. The Thousand Suns capabilities, now employed in service to the throne rather than forbidden research, proved invaluable in countering supernatural assistance that traitor forces attempted to employ. The warp itself turns against them, Magnus reported, during briefings that revealed the true scope of chaos retreat from the material realm. The entities that corrupted Horus and his brothers withdraw their support as failure mounts beyond acceptable limits. We face enemies increasingly isolated from their supernatural allies. The intelligence proved accurate, as engagement after engagement demonstrated traitor forces declining access to abilities that had once made them formidable opponents. Demons that should have manifested in response to ritual summoning failed to appear, while psychic powers that traitor sorcerers had relied upon produced increasingly unpredictable results that often harmed their own forces rather than their enemies. Yet perhaps most significantly, the campaign demonstrated coordination between loyalist forces that exceeded anything achieved during the Great Crusade's prosecution. Where primarchs had once operated independently according to their own strategic vision, they now functioned as components of a unified command structure whose effectiveness multiplied their individual capabilities beyond simple addition. The enemy's greatest weakness lies not in material deficiency, but in fundamental disunity, Alpharius observed, as intelligence reports revealed the extent of mistrust and recrimination that plagued traitor forces. They fight not as brothers united in common cause, but as individual tyrants competing for dominance over ruins. Our unity becomes their destruction. The observation proved prophetic, as successive engagements revealed traitor forces' increasing tendency to abandon allies in favor of preserving their own strength. Legions that had once coordinated their operations according to Horus's strategic vision now pursued individual survival without regard for broader tactical considerations, their fragmentation creating opportunities that loyalist forces exploited with devastating efficiency. The Night Lords vanished entirely into the galaxy's outer reaches, Conrad Kurz leading his legion in flight that abandoned any pretense of continued participation in the rebellion. The 8th Legion's withdrawal removed significant strength from traitor forces, while providing loyalist commanders with intelligence about enemy dispositions that proved invaluable in planning subsequent operations. Mortarian's Death Guard found themselves systematically isolated, as supply routes that had sustained their campaigns for months suffered complete interdiction. The 14th Legion's endurance, legendary among the Legiones Astartes, proved insufficient when faced with enemies who possessed unlimited resources and perfect knowledge of where those resources might be applied most effectively. The World Eater's descent into mindless fury reached its logical conclusion as Angron led his legion in increasingly desperate assaults that achieved nothing beyond accelerating their own destruction. The 12th Legion's warriors, consumed by rage that precluded rational tactical thinking, became easy targets for loyalist forces who could predict their movements with mathematical precision. Even Lorgar's word-bearers, masters of propaganda and corruption, found their influence waning as evidence of chaos treachery became impossible to deny. The 17th Legion's attempts to maintain morale among remaining traitor forces collapsed when confronted with systematic defeats that made their promises of ultimate victory appear as desperate lies rather than divine prophecy. The intelligence flowing through Operation Cerberus revealed the scope of the collapse with precision that allowed tactical optimization beyond anything previously achieved. Each traitor weakness became a target for surgical strikes, while every enemy strength found itself countered by loyalist capabilities specifically designed to neutralize that particular advantage. Horus commands fewer than 200 vessels, reported Brother Sergeant Kel Silonius during briefings that revealed the War Master's desperate situation. His fleet composition indicates significant damage from previous engagements, while intelligence suggests crew morale has declined to levels that compromise combat effectiveness. The War Master himself had become increasingly isolated as former allies either fled the conflict entirely or found themselves destroyed through systematic loyalist operations. The entity who had once commanded the loyalty of half the Legions Astartes now presided over a shrinking coalition whose internal conflicts consumed as much energy as resistance to imperial forces. Yet it was precisely this isolation that made Horus most dangerous, his desperation driving plans that exceeded rational calculation in their ambition and recklessness. Intelligence networks detected massive fleet movements that suggested the War Master intended one final assault that would stake everything on a single decisive engagement. "He comes for Terra," Alpharius declared during emergency sessions that brought together every available loyal Primarch, not with the careful planning and overwhelming force that his original strategy required, but with the fury of one who understands that failure means extinction. This will be the rebellion's dying blow, struck with whatever strength remains to them. The prospect of facing Horus's final gambit filled loyalist commanders with anticipation rather than dread, their confidence born of systematic victories that had demonstrated overwhelming superiority in every aspect of warfare. Yet Alpharius understood that cornered enemies often achieved their greatest victories through sheer desperation, their willingness to sacrifice everything, creating opportunities that careful planning might miss. The trap that awaited Horus at Terra would be comprehensive beyond his ability to anticipate, every approach route covered by overlapping fields of fire, while multiple contingency plans prepared responses to tactics that exceeded normal strategic thinking. Yet the Alpha Legion's Primarch also knew that the war's ultimate resolution would require more than superior preparation, demanding the courage to face powers that had transcended normal limitations through their corruption. The Hydra coiled around Terra's heart, its many heads watching for the approach of enemies whose desperation made them capable of anything, and the galaxy itself held its breath as the final confrontation approached with the inexorability of stellar mechanics. The final assault came not with the overwhelming force that Horus had once commanded, but with the desperate fury of powers that understood their time had passed. The War Master's remaining fleet translated into Saul's outer reaches, bearing the scars of 100 defeats, their formation speaking of determination, born from desperation rather than confidence in victory. Yet even in his reduced circumstances, Horus retained enough strength to threaten worlds, enough malice to demand the ultimate response that only the Emperor himself could provide. Terra's defenses met this final assault with preparations that exceeded anything previously achieved in military history, their overlapping fields of fire and redundant defensive systems creating a fortress that seemed impregnable to conventional assault. Yet Alpharius understood that conventional limitations no longer applied to enemies driven beyond rational calculation, their desperation making them capable of tactics that sane commanders would never contemplate. The War Master's approach vectors confirm intelligence projections, reported Brother Captain Sicorus from his position within Terra's primary command center. His fleet composition suggests maximum assault capability at the expense of all other considerations. This is not strategic attack, but martyrdom operation, designed to inflict maximum damage regardless of cost. The analysis proved accurate as the traitor fleet's formation became clear, their vessels stripped of unnecessary systems and loaded with armaments that exceeded safe operational parameters. Horus had transformed his remaining ships into weapons that could function only long enough to breach Terra's defenses, their crews committed to death in service of a cause that offered no possibility of survival. The engagement began in Sol's outer reaches, where Pluto's defensive installations opened fire at maximum range against targets that made no attempt at evasion or concealment. The coordinated bombardment that followed lit the void with weapon discharges that could be observed from Terra's surface, macro cannon shells and lance beams crossing impossible distances to strike at enemies whose only response was to accelerate toward their objective with single-minded determination. Yet even the most comprehensive defensive preparations could not account for enemies willing to sacrifice everything for marginal tactical advantage. Traitor vessels that should have been destroyed by the outer defensive perimeter instead pressed forward through damage that left them barely spaceworthy, their crews maintaining weapons fire even as their ships disintegrated around them. "Enemy breakthrough on Vector 77 Mark 12, came the transmission that Alpharius had anticipated, despite hoping it might not prove necessary. Multiple traitor vessels have penetrated the outer perimeter. Estimated time to Terra orbital approach, 4 hours. The Alpha Legion's response demonstrated coordination that had been decades in preparation, their defensive protocols activating with precision that transformed apparent crisis into carefully controlled engagement. Hidden weapon platforms throughout Sol revealed themselves as traitor vessels approached, their concealed positions allowing devastating crossfire against enemies who had expected clear approach routes to Terra's surface. Alpharius personally led the counterattack that would decide the battle's outcome, his fleet elements positioned to intercept traitor forces at the moment of their greatest vulnerability. The Alpha Legion's vessels moved with coordination that spoke of prescient planning, their formations optimized to exploit weaknesses that intelligence analysis had identified in enemy assault patterns. "Target the flagship escorts first," Alpharius commanded through communication networks that allowed real-time coordination between hundreds of vessels. "Isolate the vengeful spirit from supporting elements. The War Master's vessel must be contained for specialized engagement protocols." The battle that followed tested every defensive system Terra possessed, traitor desperation proving sufficient to breach barriers that should have stopped any conceivable assault. Yet even as enemy vessels achieved positions within Terra's orbital space, they found themselves facing prepared defenses that channeled their advance into predetermined engagement zones where loyalist advantages could be maximized. The other loyal Primarchs coordinated defensive responses that demonstrated the unity of purpose that Horus's rebellion had never achieved, their combined capabilities creating interlocking zones of fire that left no avenue of approach uncovered. Ferrus Manus led boarding actions against traitor vessels that penetrated the inner defensive perimeter, while Vulcan coordinated orbital bombardments that eliminated enemy formations before they could achieve effective firing positions. Corax utilized the Raven Guard's stealth capabilities to strike at traitor command vessels from unexpected vectors, his assaults disrupting enemy coordination at moments when unified response might have achieved breakthrough. Magnus provided psychic surveillance that revealed enemy intentions before they could be implemented, his abilities allowing defensive forces to position themselves optimally for each engagement. Yet the battle's true resolution would come through direct confrontation between the powers that had shaped the war from its inception. When the vengeful spirit finally broke through loyalist lines to achieve Terra orbital approach, it found itself facing not desperate defenders fighting for survival, but prepared forces executing plans that had anticipated this moment for years. The Emperor's response to his son's final challenge carried authority that made reality itself bend to his will, his golden form radiating power that spoke of capabilities transcending mortal understanding. When he teleported directly aboard the vengeful spirit, his presence filled the corrupted vessel with light that burned away shadows that had sheltered there for years. The confrontation between father and son took place in chambers where the boundaries between material reality and the warp had grown thin, their battle encompassing dimensions that normal perception could not encompass. Yet, unlike the desperate struggle that might have occurred under different circumstances, this engagement pitted the Emperor's undimmed strength against a Horus weakened by systematic defeats and abandoned by the powers that had once supported him. "You were my greatest creation," the Emperor declared, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated across multiple realities simultaneously. Yet you chose corruption over duty, damnation over service. That choice has consequences that even divine power cannot escape. Horus fought with the fury of one who understood that defeat meant not merely death, but erasure from existence, his corrupted form wielding powers that had cost him everything he had once valued. Yet the War Master who had once been capable of matching his father, blow for blow, now faced an opponent whose strength remained uncompromised, while his own had been systematically diminished through accumulated failures. The decisive moment came when the Emperor's presence overwhelmed the chaos corruption that had sustained Horus throughout the rebellion, his pure authority burning away supernatural enhancements that had replaced the War Master's natural capabilities. For an instant, the son who had been the Emperor's most trusted general stood revealed beneath layers of corruption, his expression carrying recognition of what he had become and what he had lost. "I remember," Horus whispered, his voice carrying tones of the man he had been before chaos claimed him. "I remember why I followed you, why I believed in your vision. Yet that memory only makes the corruption more complete. I cannot return to what I was, and I will not survive as what I have become." The Emperor's response carried grief that encompassed not merely personal loss, but the waste of potential that Horus's fall represented. "Then let your ending serve the future you helped to build, my son. Let your defeat ensure that others need not face the choices that destroyed you." The final exchange between them lasted mere seconds, yet seemed to encompass eternities, their conflict resolving with finality that echoed across the galaxy itself. When silence returned to the vengeful spirit's bridge, Horus lay dead by his father's hand, his body unmarked yet empty of the malevolent presence that had driven him for so many years. The psychological impact of the War Master's death rippled through the remaining traitor forces with speed that exceeded physical communication, their desperate assault collapsing into chaotic retreat as the power that had held their coalition together finally ended. Vessels that had pressed forward with suicidal determination suddenly found themselves lacking any purpose beyond simple survival. Alpharius coordinated the pursuit operations that ensured no significant traitor force could escape Sul to threaten other worlds, his intelligence networks tracking fleeing vessels to hidden bases where they might have regrouped for future operations. The Alpha Legion's systematic approach to cleanup operations demonstrated the same thoroughness that had marked their intelligence gathering throughout the war. Mortarion's flagship detected on Vector 91 Mark 7. Acceleration profile suggests engine damage, reported Brother Sergeant Thane during coordination sessions that brought together representatives from every loyal legion. Estimated interception time, 6 hours. Pursuit forces standing by for deployment authorization. The Death Guard's Primarch fell to combined assault from Iron Hands and Alpha Legion forces, his supernatural endurance proving insufficient when faced with enemies who possessed perfect knowledge of his capabilities and limitations. Mortarian's death marked the end of organized traitor resistance in Saul, though scattered enemy elements would require months to eliminate completely. The aftermath of victory revealed the true scope of what Alpharius's loyalty had achieved, transformation that exceeded mere military success to encompass fundamental change in the Imperium's character. Where the canonical timeline might have seen the Emperor enthroned but diminished, this resolution preserved his full capabilities while demonstrating the effectiveness of unity over division. The Great Crusade resumes, the Emperor declared during celebrations that marked not merely victory over rebellion, but renewal of the vision that had driven humanity to the stars. Yet our methods will reflect wisdom, gained through trials that tested every assumption we once held sacred. The Alpha Legion's capabilities will serve as the intelligence foundation for expeditions that surpass even our previous achievements. The recognition carried implications that transformed the 20th Legion's role within the broader Imperial hierarchy, their methods no longer questioned, but celebrated as essential to the Imperium's continued expansion. Where once they had operated in shadows and uncertainty, they now stood acknowledged as the hidden guardians whose vigilance made all other Imperial achievements possible. Alpharius accepted this vindication with expressions that mixed satisfaction with understanding of the responsibilities it entailed. "The Hydra has served its purpose," he declared during ceremonies that brought together the Imperium's greatest heroes. "Yet service never ends for those who would preserve what others have built. We will watch, and we will guard, and we will ensure that corruption never again approaches the throne undetected." The galaxy spread before renewed Imperial forces like an ocean awaiting exploration, its countless worlds offering opportunities that seemed limitless to those whose unity had proven stronger than any force arrayed against them. The Alpha Legion's networks provided intelligence-gathering capabilities that made expansion both safer and more efficient than anything achieved during the original Great Crusade. New expeditionary fleets departed Saul, bearing lessons learned through trial by fire, their coordination enhanced by communication networks that prevented the isolation and misunderstanding that had made rebellion possible. Each world brought into compliance strengthened the whole, while Alpha Legion operatives ensured that corruption could never again take root in shadows beyond Imperial oversight. The Emperor himself led expeditions that carried his light to the galaxy's furthest reaches, his undimmed power serving as beacon for species that had never known hope beyond mere survival. The Great Crusade's renewal exceeded even its original scope, encompassing not merely conquest, but genuine unity that transformed diverse worlds into willing partners rather than reluctant subjects. Years passed, then decades, as the Imperium expanded beyond anything previously imagined. The Alpha Legion served as its hidden foundation, their intelligence networks ensuring that threats could be identified and eliminated before they achieved dangerous growth. Where once the galaxy had trembled before the possibility of civil war, it now basked in the light of unity that seemed eternal in its permanence. The Hydra's many heads watched over humanity's empire with vigilance that never slept, their loyalty proven beyond any doubt through service that had saved not merely the Imperium, but the very concept of unity itself. In the end, Alpharius had chosen correctly. His decision to reject alien manipulation, preserving a future that exceeded every dream of what loyalty might accomplish. The galaxy belonged to humanity, and humanity would keep it safe.